hope we all had a great Easter. So again, before I hand to Patricia O'Brien to do our welcome, some quick housekeeping. You've heard the drill before, here it goes again. Toilets over to your left, 3 fire escapes, 1 over near the toilet, 1 near the lifts and 1 over in this direction. Try not to put more than 6 people in the lift. Apparently the lift will get stuck and that would be lots of fun, so we'll try and only have 6 people in the lift. What else do I need to tell you? Thank you everyone who's been visiting the forum. The video from Michael Kendrick's presentation is online on the forum already. Thank you everyone who's been filling in the survey monkeys. They're really useful to us. Be sending around the survey monkey feedback evaluation again for this breakfast shortly. You can still fill in the survey monkey feedback for breakfast 1 and 2 if you haven't done that just yet. So thank you. Now the last thing I want to share with you before I introduce Tricia again was I've been reflecting out myself on Michael Kendrick's talk with us about possibilities and vision, and of course Michael Goldsworthy is talking about moving towards a business model. So CDS moving towards a business model, I thought that we could still fulfill on our mission of helping organisations and people with disability have better quality of life and have good support. So along those lines, I'd like to let you know about, if you haven't already, this is we are running a direct support professionals, and somewhere here, view full screen mode, there we go. In July we're doing a direct support professionals conference. We're having John O'Brien, Connie Lyle O'Brien, Phil Tuckman, Associate Professor Vivian Ritchie, some of our keynote speakers. I really encourage you, call for abstracts out at the moment. I really encourage people, please submit some abstracts focused on how we can support direct support professionals to do their work. So I really encourage you to come along to this conference and also to submit an abstract for this conference that we're running in July at the University of Sydney. Okay, so I think that's about enough from me, and I press this one over here, there we go. So again, Professor Patricia O'Brien, our new director at the Centre, I told you about the excellent work she's been doing around inclusive research, inclusive education, and the books, some of the books that she's written. One thing maybe you didn't know about Patricia that I'll add today is Patricia, for a part of her life, lived in what I would call a co-residency model. I'm sure Tricia might like to tell you more about that, and I was part of the team with Tricia when we wrote a literature review around innovative accommodation and support models for people with disabilities. So another one of the very interesting things Tricia has done in her work. So I hand you now to Professor Patricia O'Brien.
Great. Thanks, Sam. It's always nice to be introduced by you. And I did live in a life-sharing situation for 4 years before I fell in love and went to live in New Zealand with my husband Ray. But yeah, it was a very good experience, and it was an experience that was right for me at that time of my life. I had a 2-story terrace house, and it had been wired to make 2 independent apartments, and so there were a group of really enlightened social workers at the time, I thought, in Melbourne, that had this concept of life sharing. And I thought, oh well, I've got some space in my life, maybe this could be a good thing that I could get involved in. And so I was introduced to 2 women that lived in Fitzroy, not so far from Melbourne University, so that part of Melbourne, and they were living in a 40-bed hostel, and they wanted to live more independently. So they came, and for a really reduced rent they lived upstairs and I lived downstairs. But for those 4 years we did co-create our lives together, really. Their friends became my friends became their friends, and we supported one another. And I learned a lot about how you can survive when you don't really have much income. And that issue that's sometimes talked about, that if you live on a benefit, it sometimes correlates with poverty. These women knew how to survive on very little income. Anyway, it's gone on, and we're still very close friends. So it does relate really to the topic today, which is ownership. And once again, that's one of Peter Block's conversations. And by that, I think the message from Peter Block is that if we're going to be involved in change, we've got to take some ownership over it. We need to think through, what does this mean for me to be truly genuine about what the change is. You know, am I prepared publicly to make a statement that I am now going to be involved in something that is different, that's something that places people with disability at the centre of all decision making, and sometimes decisions that I may not agree with, but I'm prepared to move into this change and take some ownership for my own reflections and thinking. On the other hand, I think we can also interpret Block's challenge to have a conversation on ownership about how can we support people with disability to have more ownership over their own lives. And I suppose in some ways the co-residency idea was based on that as well. Sam, it sounds as though I've prepared to say all of this, but Sam just mentioned this morning, that he was going to mention the co-residency, so I'm just reflecting on it as something that yeah, sure, I got involved in something that was different, and I did have to take ownership for my own involvement in it, and to publicly defend it, really, amongst some of my friends at the time that couldn't quite understand why I wanted to live that way. So I think it's got some relevance to what we're going to hear about today from Darren. I'll introduce Darren presently, but just at this time, I'm just wondering if I could invite you to open up with the same round of your name, where you're from, because I'm sure that some of us aren't carrying the names of everybody with us in between breakfasts. And also anything you reflected on from Michael Kendrick's presentation, and then anything that you gained from last week that you think should go in this publication that we're going to be producing that's coming out of this, which is something that we hope people in community, human services, people with disabilities will read to support us all on the journey of change. So anything from Michael's presentation that you reflected on, and anything that you think we should consider relevant for this blueprint. So with that, maybe I should introduce Darren now, because it's quite hard to go around Darren and just come in cold. Darren is our Catalyst speaker today, and I first met Darren, he reminded me, when the first year that I came back from Ireland, I went to an NDS conference, and it was in Queensland, and we were both checking out in this hotel at the same time, because I was fresh off the boat from Ireland, and thought, Ginnelly, oh wow, that's an Irish name. So I was always looking, and still do to a certain extent, for things that can remind me of the beauty of Ireland, and to talk with Darren about his background, we shared that at the time, let alone Darren's work in my place that we're going to hear about today. But Darren's been in the field for 27 years. He started off as a direct care worker, and worked both in government and non-government services, and now is the managing director of my place. And I think the mission that Darren has personally is to support people to have more control over how they live. And I believe, Darren, you've been the director there for 10 years. So we're very pleased you've made the trip from Perth. It's no easy trip, that. It takes quite a long time, and then you've got to adapt to the time change overnight. So we do appreciate it, and we know that you're not lingering in Sydney because you are so busy. You'll be going back later this afternoon, so thanks for the time. So I'll start over. Megan, would you like to introduce yourself, where you're from, and if you weren't here at Michael's gig, just pass on. So Megan, over to you.
Hi, I'm Megan Sprague from Achieve Australia. I've got the grand title of Business Excellence Manager, which is quality management, risk management, those kind of elements. Unfortunately, I haven't been here for the first two sessions, but you will see me for the next four, and I'm very keen to be here. Thank you.
Hi. Good morning, I'm David Rafferty, also from Achieve Australia. Again, I also missed the last 2 sessions here, but the experience of the conversations last year linger with me strongly, so really keen to pick up the running today and next year.
Good morning, my name is Trish Wetton. I'm from Foresight Foundation for Deaf and Blind Adults. I attended the first conversation, which was absolutely wonderful, thought-provoking. I think I commented at the end of it. The second one I missed, unfortunately, so I'm here today, and I really enjoyed Patricia's opening remarks. It's put me in the mood. You know, we're into that. At Foresight, we really look after a wide range of people with abilities. So, thought-provoking thing today, no doubt.
Good morning, I'm Mariana. I'm the Accommodation Services Manager also with the Foresight Foundation. Unfortunately, I also missed the last session, but the previous one to that, Michael's session, just reminded me that although we all work in a community services sort of profile accommodations across the board, we've got to focus on the elements of business as well to make our organisations viable.
Great.
Hi, I'm Lena Blinko and I work with the Foresight Foundation. Unfortunately, I missed the first two, but I was fortunate to go to breakfast conversations before, and I'm looking forward to seeing what these are about.
Great, good. Catherine.
Catherine Watts from Inside the Living. I have made the first 2 breakfasts and I'm finding it a very valuable experience. It's really assisting me and opening my mind so I can open the mind of my staff and team.
Okay, thank you. Liz.
I'm Liz Hopkins, Manager of Person-Centred Practice and Culture at Northcott, and I was here for Michael Calsides and Michael Goldsworth, and I love the fact that it can make you think about the really big picture across the whole of Australian society.
Come back to Shirley.
Okay, thanks, Shirley.
Hi, my name is Melia, and I'm from Northcott, and I'm just here to support Shirley and Ben, and I'm just looking forward to hear more about the change.
I'm Ben from Northcott. I think reflecting on the last conversation with Michael Kendrick, I found it extremely positive how he focused on the individual as opposed to like the organisation as itself.
Great, thanks.
I was placed on supervisor for a day program in Wingate Foundation, and I didn't make the question. I appreciate it, but I'm here today and looking forward to it.
Good, welcome.
I'm Adele Tashkin, also from Wingate. I'm a person-centred consultant. I think one of the things that sort of stayed with me from the first 2 conversations was Ben's point. I'm not sure if it was last time, Ben, or the first conversation that you mentioned about it would be so good to be able to go to places that will support you and your life, and it doesn't have to be tagged as a disability. So that's something that will be something to really contemplate for change for the future for us.
Great, thanks for that. Chris.
My name is Chris Campbell. I'm the CEO of the Junction Works, and I attended last session and found I think it was quite good because there's a lot of uncertainty and lack of clarity and a little bit of hysteria sort of happening sort of at different parts of the sector at present, and I think it was good with Michael around just focusing on one person at a time, and we do have the opportunity with a few young people and families that we're supporting, so I just went back and sort of said, look, let's focus on them, and then we'll all learn around the process ourselves, and then what type of model or form comes from that will inform us and educate us.
Thanks, Chris.
My name is Carly Colvin from Catholic Care. I've attended the first 2 meetings, and both of them have brought great insight and caused us to reflect quite deeply into how we're going to move as an organisation, but keeping the individual as our main focus. So I think Michael brought that very clearly last couple of weeks when he was focusing on person-centred and having the individual at the centre of everything. So even though we're dealing with large organisational changes, the person with disability is our focus. So not keeping our eye on the ball in that regard.
Thanks.
David Cannings, Chief Financial Officer of Wesley Mission. I've just come along to sort of hear and observe and try to understand what's happening in this area.
Great, well, you're very welcome.
Peter Knight, I'm Business Manager at Wesley Mission. Very pleased to have David here. I'm sure able to get a lot more money out of him now after he's been but look, there were some really great things in the last couple of sessions, and I suppose just a couple stood out to me, and I've written them down here. Michael compared having a disability to a little bit like learning to drive a car. You know, like it's super scary, you don't want to do it. I've got a 19-year-old at the moment that just got a manual, so I kind of related to this illustration. But you know, once you get over all those hurdles, you know, actually it is a pathway to freedom. And you know, for people with disabilities, it is an incredible sort of scary thing that instead of having someone looking after your every need and sort of to actually step out and say, well, what do I want to do and how do I want to do it and how is it all going to work? You know, and it's just that vision of there are hurdles, you know, for us, for mainstream sort of thing, there's hurdles around understanding that, but actually from a person with a disabilities point of view, they've got a lot of hurdles as well just to cope with the opportunities.
Thanks, Peter.
My name's Julie Cleary and I work in United Head Disability. I've been here for the last 2 sessions, and the last one, I guess there's a couple of things that stood out for me, and that was Michael's call that you should start breaking down the current systems into individualised work, one person at a time, and that don't let the current system get in your way of developing change now.
Great, thanks, Julie. Shirley, would it be right to come back to you now?
I am Shirley and I am from Northgate. I found last conversation was important how we can make our choices in our live and focus on individual.
Thanks very much, Shirley. It's great. Michael.
I'm Michael Austin from Catholic Care Sydney. I was here for the first 2 sessions. There was a lot of richness, I think, in last week's, but I think one of the take-homes for me was the reminder about vision, the importance of vision and imagining what can a better life look like. I think that was something I took away.
Yeah, I think for me one of his statements that I took away was, you know, people will just buy what's on offer unless we're actually motivated to make the change. We're talking a lot about change, expecting that people are going to rock up and say, well, this is what I want, I've thought about this. But I think from those of us that are, you know, providing opportunities, we've got a big task in ensuring that we've been creative enough so that people can choose from a new array of things. And I remember when John O'Brien was here last year, he opened a one-day seminar suggesting that in the States, with individualised funding, nothing much changed. People continued to go back to the same services, and the services didn't necessarily change, but sort of conceptually things had changed. People went back now with a bucket of money, but they didn't want anything that was much different. Now, if that happened here, I think it's a reflection that we haven't been, well, co-producing something together, maybe, or co-creating something, which is one of Block's messages to us. Yourself, did you get out of last week, Claire?
Quite similar to Michael, with the visioning.
I still think it was, Michael said something along the lines of, if you think it's impossible, it's probably already been done.
Yeah, that's right.
That's good. Okay. Claire, would you just have a minute just to reflect back what some of the thoughts were or reflections?
There's a few things that people have been thinking on, thinking about. The first one was breakfast
Darren, I'm very pleased to be able to hand over to you. So Darren will now tell us a lot about what's happening in Western Australia. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia, and good morning, everyone. It's absolute pleasure to be here, and I congratulate the centre. I was just reading through some of the stuff last night that you're doing, and I think it was mentioned over here, we are certainly in a period of reform, social reform in the disability sector. We've got the National Disability Insurance Scheme on the horizon, and I think in various states there's various changes that are happening, more so, not more so, but also in my state in WA, we've certainly got a lot of reform happening there, which I'll touch on in this thing. So I congratulate the centre for the way they're going about doing this. I think it's good to invite people to come and have the conversation, and you know, from that, I mean, I'm getting the sense that people are getting a lot out of it. So, and we're all through this period of change together, so it's quite good. I'll just I was here last week on holidays, and I was saying to Sam and Patricia this morning what a difference in the weather. Last week it was bloody hot here. I was glad to get home to Perth for cooler weather. And then this week it's raining, so. So this morning I just want to cover off on 4 areas, and some of the stuff I'm going to go through quite quickly because it's in your packs and you can read it another day, another time. The main thing I wanted to talk about was MyPlace, the organisation that I'm the managing director for. MyPlace we only do individualised services. We commenced in 1996. And so we have no group living arrangements at all. It's totally individualised. So I wanted to share that experience with you about how we go about doing it. And then I'll talk about Individualised Solutions Australia. I'll explain that as we go through. And then just, I wanted to connect a little bit about what I'm going to talk about with the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and about what I see as some of the challenges and opportunities of that scheme coming up, as we know it at the moment. So we'll go around the room. It's always difficult talking after Michael Kendrick too, because he's such a thought-provoking and a way more talented speaker than what I am. But one of the things that came through is putting the person in the centre of services. This slide was developed, I think, around about 1990 by Greg Lewis. He's the executive chairman of MyPlace, and prior to that he was the director of local area coordination in WA. In 1988 we commenced individualised funding, and what came out of that was ensuring that you put the person in the centre. So it was a shift of the power, moving away from traditional services where the person has to come into the hierarchy or into the bureaucracy and try and fit into the services that's offered there, to flipping that around and putting the person absolutely in the centre, and then the services have to come in and meet the person. And that's certainly something that's driven us at MyPlace, is that we always ensure that the person is in the centre, and it's about their services, what they want, not about what we can offer. We offer a suite of support arrangements to support their services, but we absolutely put the person in the middle around that. I think an important question for you as service providers is to keep this in mind. Is your organisation, the way it's set up, is it truly putting the person in the centre? And if you can be honest about that, I think you'll find in some services you'll think maybe they're not, and maybe we need to shift a bit more, and some you absolutely say yes you are. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, this slide. So this is a history of individualised funding in WA. What individualised funding in WA means is that there's an allocation of money attached to an individual, and we get quite good allocations of money. So some people that we support can get up to $200,000 a year recurrently. It's recurrent every year. It's attached to that person. They then have to come to a service provider or to a local area coordinator, and they administer the money on their behalf. So at MyPlace, we say we're the budget holder. We don't determine what the person wants to spend it on. They do that themselves. So we're the holder of the budget. What's good about that is that if the person leaves MyPlace or wherever they leave, their money goes with them. So it's secure, it's portable, and it goes with them. So it doesn't stay with the organisation, it goes. What that does is it instills a discipline in the organisation to be providing a service that the person wants, because if you're not, they're going to leave and they're going to go somewhere else. So I think it's fantastic. So individualised funding started in 1988 through local area coordination, and this is the journey that we've gone on. So if I sort of go down to 2005, all organisations were, some were typically block funded, and then they disaggregated all of that so that everyone had an allocation of funding attached to them. So if they weren't happy with their service provider, they could move and take that funding with them. Of significance, I think it was around about 2010, people who were receiving funding, over 50% of those people were now choosing an individualised option as opposed to a group living arrangement, a group home or a hostel or something like that. And that now is up to around about 65%. And for the first time in WA's history that I can remember, we now have some vacancies in group homes because people are not choosing that type of arrangement. People really want an individualised type of arrangement. 2013, this year, we're in massive procurement reforms, how we contract with government. And essentially the two things that the government's doing is they're making service providers become a price setter as opposed to a price taker. And there's a more focus on outcomes rather than outputs. And there's a genuine appetite from our state government to look at outcomes as opposed to outputs. There is quite a genuine appetite around that. So 2013 beyond, we've got the NDIS, and we're all probably not sure what that's going to look like, but it's on the horizon. About 4 years ago, we did a bit of a survey around what has been the impact of individualised funding. It's been in existence in WA for 20 years, and we wanted to check what it was. And these were the main things that came out of it. So we interviewed some CEOs around town and in non-government organisations and asked them what they thought the impact of individualised funding was. We asked them what they thought, what was good for people with disabilities, what wasn't so good, what was good for service providers, what wasn't so good, and what was good for, and we also interviewed the funder and said what was good for you and what wasn't good for you. And I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because they're in your book and you can read them at another time. But these were the things that people said. It reduced the financial burden, it allowed more time for people with disabilities with other family members, it improved their well-being, increased the skills of the person with a disability. It gave more time to the carers, so these are natural carers, they're not paid carers. It increased the skills of the family, added emotional support, decreased family stress, and that's really important, expanded friendship networks for the person, more positive about the future and able to return to local community. If you think about that list, that's a pretty significant list, and the impact that it's had has been quite significant. So what we looked at is what did the funder and service providers think was good for people with disabilities, and there's a list of things. This list is not necessarily it's not our list, so I may disagree with some of these points that are up here, but this is what service providers and the funder said they thought was good for people with disabilities around individualised funding. And so greater and real choice, more buying power, it encourages you to be more innovative in your service responses. There's greater transparency in spending. Part of the procurement reforms with our state government is now they're saying, will you as a provider provide a regular update around the person's budget and their expenditure? At my place, we've been doing it since we started, and every 2 months a person gets an expenditure update around their budget, because we say we're the holder of your budget, it's not our budget, it's your money, and therefore you need to know what it's being spent on. So you know what it's being spent on because you're deciding about it. So this is what people said was good for people with disabilities. This is what people said was good for service providers, and again, I may not necessarily agree with these, but this is what some of the CEOs around town in WA thought was good for service providers around individualised funding. So it ensures greater transparency and accountability. Most new growth to individualised funding was orientated to non-government organisations. So again, I'm not sure what the situation is in New South Wales, but our state government is trying to get out of service provision. They want to be the funder as opposed to the service provider. So these were some of the things, and these are in your pack, so rather than go through these. This is what service providers said was not so good for service providers. Set-up costs can be high. Again, I would challenge that. I mean, at my place, the organisation I work for, our set-up costs are really quite low. So, but some organisations think that it's a lot higher. Service reporting can be burdensome. Again, I would challenge that. I don't think it is that burdensome. Certainly, the way we do it at my place, it's not. So these were some of the things that service providers thought wasn't that good around individualised funding. This is what the government thought was good for funded from the funding point of view around individualised funding. And again, you know, promoting choice and flexibility, important. Greater transparency and accountability between the DSO and the non-government organisations. If you've got money allocated to an individual and that person's aware of that, there's absolute greater transparency because it's their money and they want to know where it's all going, and the government want to know what it's being spent on as well. So. The person remains funded if they leave a provider. That's really significant in WA, and you know, portability of funding, it gives a person with a disability some surety wherever they go, they've got that money attached to them. So, and this is what the government thought was not so good for them. It costs more to manage and administer. It does from their point of view, it really does, because they have a contract officer with more people. It's harder for DSC to link funding to actual hours of support. I think it's probably harder for them to, because you're not necessarily spending the funding on hours of support. You may be spending it on something else that has a better benefit for the person with a disability. And how the only way they can measure it at the moment is through outputs, not through outcomes. So I think it's probably a flaw in their system rather than anything else. So all of that stuff is in your books, and you can look at it another time. So my place, the organisation that I'm the managing director for, just a couple of things as I talk through this. We use the word consumers, which describes the people we support and their families. So you'll hear me use the word consumers. And our direct care staff, we call them personal assistants because we believe that's what people with disabilities need, some personal assistance. They don't need care, they don't need support workers, they need typically personal assistants. So you'll hear me use those terms as we go through. The organisation was deliberately called My Place. We talked about ownership, and the reason we call it My Place is it's a person with a disability saying this is my place, and so that's fundamental to everything we do. So if I go to visit people's houses, generally individuals' houses, if I see things on kitchen walls around rosters and things like that, they get taken down straight away because that's not a home, that's not what we do. So it really is a sense of home, and it really is a sense of home ownership. So we were established in 1996, and an advantage we have is because we were established in the mid-90s, is we haven't been linked to some of the traditional arrangements that have happened in the past. And I'm talking about things like industrial arrangements, so we've never been linked to an award. So we've always had ultimate flexibility in our industrial arrangements that we can, that we offer. So we've had an advantage around that. We were set up as a company structure. And the reason, there was a couple of reasons for that. One is the three guys who set it up, they're quite innovative, and there was no company within WA. They were all originally non-government, not-for-profit organisations, so they wanted to do something a bit different. But secondly, they wanted to have control over decision making. So if someone needed money for something, they didn't want to have to go to a 12-person board who all had vested interest. They just wanted to be able to make that decision there and then very quickly. So the same three owners of the company are still there today. They're still the board of directors. In 2000, we established My Place Foundation, and that was established for two reasons. The first reason was that when we set up My Place WA, everyone was set up in what we call as a group employer. So the person with a disability was set up as the employer of their people. And what we found, 4 years down the track, is that some families were saying, look, I don't want to do this, I want you guys to do a lot of this stuff. So therefore we established My Place Foundation, that's where we provide our provider managed services. So all of our coordinators are employed through My Place Foundation. The other reason we did it is that there was changes to the tax laws, and it allowed us to offer salary sacrifice to our staff. So it was an advantage to our staff, and it was an advantage to our consumers. We're only located in WA, and we're in the metro area. We cover the whole metro area of Perth. And we're in 2 regional areas, Albany and the southwest down in Bunbury and Busselton. And we're about to hit another regional area, the Goldfields up around Kalgoorlie. So as I mentioned, all of our services are individualised. We have no group living arrangements at all. What that means is it doesn't mean that people with a disability don't share or live together. What's fundamental to people with a disability coming to live together is how they come together. So what happens in WA is you'll get funded, 4 people may get funded, and then people will try and match those 4 people to live together. What we say is we won't do that at my place. If you know a person that's a friend of yours, or is a brother or a sister, or you work with that person and you want to share a house together, then we'll support you to live together. So we're not saying people with disabilities can't live together, we're just saying how you come together is a thing. So we will get people, families will say to us, I want my son and daughter to live with another person with a disability, can you go and recruit someone? And I'll say, no, we can't. I'll say, if you've got a friend or someone, then we will do that. So that's fundamental to how we set arrangements up. All of our funding is from the state government, apart from some private funding we get, so people through a compensation payout. We have 4 management approaches, and this is stuff I'd really like to talk about. Organisation managers is where it's coordinated. So we allocate a coordinator and they coordinate all the services that are required. What they don't coordinate is the decision making. So a person with a disability will never, at my place, have someone knock on their door and say, I'm your staff member for the day. They would have met the person, they would have selected that person, and they would have decided that they want that person to come and work for them. So that will never happen, unless it's an absolute emergency, then that would happen. But otherwise, they will be part of that whole selection process, or the family member or someone close to them would be involved in that. Shared coordination is the same as organisation managed, but it's people who need 24 hours, 7-day a week care, so they need overnight support. I'll talk about how we set that up shortly. Shared management is where we set the person with a disability or the family member up as the employer. They are the employer of their people, and they do their own recruiting, their own selecting, their own training. They decide what hours of work, they decide what pay rates they want to pay. What my place does is we provide a bureau service, so we do their payroll on their behalf, we remit tax on their behalf, we do superannuation, we do all those sorts of things, but they are the employer and they're recorded as the employer. And then self-management is where it's the same as shared management, except they don't get us to do the payroll and the ATO and all that, they do all of that themselves. But at the moment, the money can't go directly to the person with a disability. It's got to come through an organisation or through local area coordination. So by way of a description, this is what happens in our support options, and people can move between these. Life happens, and life happens, and people, they may want a coordinator at some point, and then things can be going really well, and they say, well, why should we pay your coordinator? We'd rather just do some of this stuff ourselves. So then they'll move down to shared management, and they do a lot of that stuff themselves. So I'll just move over here. So self-management is basically where my place receives money. We advance the money to the consumer, and then they organise all their own staff, they recruit their own people, they pay them whatever they need to do. And what they do is they then pass once a month or once every 3 months, they just remit, give the money back to us, and then we advance them the next lot of money again. So it's really quite a simple process. Shared management, which is probably our most popular support arrangement, is where we set the person with a disability or the family up as the employer. So they're an employer of record. We have probably about 120 of these arrangements. So we have 120 employers, if you like, that we manage stuff on their behalf. They absolutely select their own people. We don't have anything to do with recruiting. They train them. They decide what hours they want them to come and work. And the way we do that is through what we call a private and domestic contract arrangement. I don't know whether that happens here in New South Wales, but a private and domestic contract is basically a common law contract. And the reason we wanted to go down that road is because it gives ultimate flexibility to the person with a disability or a family. If you want a person to come and support you for half an hour in the morning, a private and domestic arrangement allows you to do that. You don't have to have a minimum of 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours. hour break or whatever it is, you just get them to come in for half an hour. That's all you need them to do. So it gives ultimate flexibility to the person with a disability. It's a legally binding contract. It also, and this is where people start to get a little bit uncomfortable, it also sits outside industrial relations. So there is no unfair dismissal linked with it. There is no annual leave requirements, all those sorts of things. There are things like paid maternity leave, paternity leave, superannuation, those sorts of things apply. But it sits outside industrial relations. So what a fantastic safeguard it gives to people with disabilities. They can choose who comes in and out of my home, and if I don't want that person in their home, move that person on. That's the reason that we support. Although it can be challenging, because it doesn't give a lot of comfort for the people working there.
Does it specifically sit outside the legislation?
Yes. Sits outside. This is in WA.
Yeah.
In state you have different rules around that, but in WA it sits outside. And we've had it tested twice.
Fair Work is national legislation. How does it sit outside the Fair Work
In
Act?
WA, it doesn't sit under the federal jurisdiction. It sits under the state jurisdiction.
Okay.
Because it's a common law contract, so it sits under the WA legislation. So we had a test at Fair Work Australia, which we were challenged on it under an unfair dismissal. We went, one of our consumers was.
Yeah.
We supported them, and Fair Work Australia said this doesn't sit under our jurisdiction. It's got to go back to the state. And the state confirmed that it doesn't sit as an industrial relation.
Yeah, it's great.
What about
like
the
6
employees? Are you going to cover how they feel about not having,
Yes.
not being employed under a protection of an industrial instrument?
Yes. Yeah, well, I'll come to that shortly. Shared coordination is the same as provider managers except for people who need overnight support. And provider managers, we're at coordinated all the stuff on behalf of the people, as I said, apart from the decision making. So that's how we support people, and people can move. So we've got some people in shared management, their situations have changed, and we will then offer a coordinator who will coordinate some of that stuff. So this area here, not many people want to do this. So whilst we've only just recently started offering this, because people don't want the burden of remitting stuff to the ATO or to paying superannuation or organising workers' comp insurance, all that sort of stuff. They don't want to do that, so they'd rather we do that, but they do want to decide who comes in and out of their home. So that's shared management is probably our most popular sort of area. These percentage charges are set by government, so we have a thing called business rules where we get 100% funding comes to my place. We are entitled to retain 15% for our administration and management, and 85% has to get passed across to the person with a disability for their direct care costs. So it's very transparent, and we absolutely, in our budget statements back to the consumer, we let them know that. So just a little bit more of a breakdown from my place. We support 260 people, either in their own home or family home, and community activities. 125 of these consumers employ their own personal assistants, and my place manages their payroll, financial and other bureau services on their behalf, so that's shared management. 32 consumers employ their own personal assistants, and in addition, they have my place recruit and select their own people. So those people in shared coordination with overnight support, again, we wanted to give people ultimate flexibility through a private and domestic arrangement. So therefore, my place can't be the employer of record there. It has to be a person with a disability or the family member. So we set the person with a disability or the family member up, but they say, I don't want to be involved in the recruiting and training, I want you to do that. So, being involved doesn't mean you don't make the decision, it's just we will advertise and we will shortlist and we'll do all that sort of stuff on behalf of people. 108 people utilise PAs directly employed by my place, so that's our provider managed area. We have 12 service coordinators who are employed by my place, and they will support somewhere between, 12 service coordinators and advisors, and they'll support somewhere between 8 and 36 arrangements, and 4 team leaders, and they provide supervision to the service coordinators, but they also have a consumer load as well, and that was really important to us, that they maintain a small consumer load, so they have direct contact with consumers, and then supervise the service coordinators. And then the last point, second last point, 33 people live in host families. So that's similar to the situation Patricia described, where a family will open their home up to a person with a disability, and the person with a disability will go and live there. What's fantastic about those arrangements, and this is a national scheme, is that the reimbursement payment we pay people, which is around about, I think it's probably about $55,000 a year, is tax-free. There's no assessable income, because the ATO deem it's a reimbursement for costs of having a person with a disability live in your home. And so that's a fantastic scheme. It's also, from my perspective as a managing director, it's some of our most potentially vulnerable arrangements, because a person with a disability is living in a family home, so therefore our ability to monitor and supervise that is a little bit limited. So we have to have various ways that we can do that to ensure safeguarding for the person with a disability. Just before I go on, just talk about some of our arrangements, which is really important, about how we connect with the people we support. This is probably more helpful. All of our service coordinators work from home, they don't work from our office, and we do that for two reasons. One is that we don't want people coming into the office and talking about various things that they will talk about, because it takes them away from working with the people with disabilities. So we want them out in the field, we want them close to the people that they're supporting. So we set them up in a home office and they all work from home. And secondly, most of our coordinators have a young family, so it helps them to manage their work-life balance by being at home and going to school assemblies when they need to, or picking up the kids from school, etc. But the main reason is that they're close to the people that they're supporting. So our office, our head office, we only have 11 people who work in there, and that's really important if you're going to set up some of these arrangements. You don't need a big bureaucracy to run this stuff. What you do need is people, well, like this morning when Patricia picked me up, that can multitask and do lots of different things. And so all of the people that work in our office will do various tasks, from putting out the rubbish to running the organisation to whatever else, running our finances, etc., etc. So that was really important to us, because we ensure that the service coordinators have a manageable workload. So on average, they work with 11 people with disabilities, and the reasons for that is they get to know them well, they plan with them, they get to know the person's family well, and they get to look at future needs and goals, which is really important for us. And our advisors, so over in the self-directed service part, the blue part, they're the people that work with about 36, because the people in self-directed services or shared management, the person with a disability is set up as the employer. So therefore our contact is less, we don't need to do as much. So that's why they can work with more people. Just going back to the question around private and domestic and the employee and the safety net for them. How we manage that is we're upfront and honest. We say to them straight away that this is a private and domestic arrangement. It's a common law contract that you will have with the person, and these are the things that make up a common law contract. And we say straight up front that it's not protected by industrial relations law. So we tell people right up front, this is what you're entering into. Our evidence, it is evidence, is that the people in shared management are better at recruiting their own people than what we are. They're better at retaining their own people than what we are. And they offer, whilst they have a common law contract, they offer a lot more flexible conditions and arrangements around those sorts of employment type of things. Because what happens is the person with a disability, the employee connects with the person with a disability, not with the organisation. So the relationship is very strong in terms of what happens there. So really, whilst the contract is there to ensure that you get a regular income and annual leave and things like that, if that's what's contained in the contract, it's a very minor part of that arrangement, because what we say is if the person doesn't want you in their home, then you surely don't want to be in their home, because it's not working. The relationship is broken down and it's not working. So the way we manage that to answer the question is we just be upfront and honest and tell people this is what it is, and people have a choice. They don't have to enter into it. They don't have to work with that person. They can come and work for My Place, the organisation, where we have, you know, all the industrial agreements that we have to have. So, but our evidence is that people in shared management are way better at employing their own people than what we are. They pay them higher than what we do because they've got more money, so they do, and they want to keep them because they know that if this person doesn't turn up to get me out of bed, I'm not getting out of bed. So they can't ring My Place and say, can you provide a staff member? Because we say, well, you're the employer, not us. So, so that's how we get around that, is by being upfront and absolutely honest. And we've got, we've had legal advice, and we've got template documents that people can use. So it does give people some surety, but it does sit outside industrial relations, and we explain the reasons why we do that. So
do you provide or offer the common law contract as well?
Yes, yes. So people will get a resource pack from us, which has got all the template documents and that people need in there. So.
Sorry, similarly, when you say they provide their own training, do you provide them resources for that, or is it entirely left to them to say however they want to train someone?
We will provide resources as in terms of contacts, and they may want to, or awareness of training that's coming up. If they've got a particular type of training need and they're not sure what to do, we'll provide them with those contacts. But remember, some people who are in shared management, a couple of people we support run their own businesses, so there's no impairment, intellectual impairment at all. So they don't need us telling us what to do. And in terms of training, they can organise all that stuff themselves. Some people do have an intellectual impairment. They've got a family member doing it on their behalf. So,
but they understand.
But the shift is fundamental to this is you letting go of those risks and saying, I believe the person can do it. And that's a fundamental shift from an organisational point of view, is how you make that shift. We haven't had to make that shift because we started in '96 and we started it. But some organisations, when I start talking about this stuff, I can see people shuffling in their seats because it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. But it's shifting the authority from you to them, shifting the control from you to them, and that can be tricky and difficult. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's really, because at the end of the day, if something goes really bad or wrong, the government's not going to go after the person with a disability. They're going to come after my organisation. So, but we accept that risk because we fundamentally believe in shifting that power across to the person. So. Some of the other things that we do where we ensure that there's a connection with the person rather than with the organisation, we don't have any annual reports. My Place has never done an annual report. We don't have any newsletters, and we don't have any big Christmas staff parties. And the reason we do that, not because we're a heartless organisation, because we want the person who's working for My Place or in a shared management arrangement to connect with the person with a disability, not with the organisation. So if you like, all of our coordinators who are set up with 11 people that they support, they're all like a mini My Place, if you like. And so what we say is connect with your coordinator, not with My Place, the organisation. So, so that's a decision we make. It's interesting because our funder loves annual reports and stuff like that, but they just don't get it from us because we want people to connect. The relationship with the person with a disability is what's important, not with the organisation. So. Over the years, we've got, this is what we know and believe, and this is what consumers tell us through their actions and through their words. We firmly believe that the person with a disability or their family knows the most about themselves. They are the natural authority. At the end of the day, their decision is what counts. And so we respect that, and we have people who leave My Place because they're not happy with what we offer, and we have people coming to My Place because they are happy with what we offer. We do believe that consumers and their family know what they want. They want a level of control, and that's why we offer those 4 type of arrangements, so that people can get us to do as much as they want us to do, or they can get us to do as little as they want us to do. So we offer that level of support for people. People can and want to direct their own supports. They will work in partnership. They understand the funding arrangement. They know that we've got responsibilities, and they know that they've got responsibilities. And so they will work in partnership with us. They will share the responsibilities. they want My Place to do just enough. One of the things that My Place is we provide the support to people. We're not a housing provider, we're not a landlord, we never will be a landlord. So we don't own any houses. So what our responsibility is to support the person to be a good tenant with the housing association or whoever they've got their housing with. So we won't become housing provider. We won't become a training provider because that's not our expertise. Our expertise is to provide, if you like, in many instances, social support for the people that we support. So what we will do is we'll ensure people get that training, but we'll contract it in or buy it in or whatever it may be. We jointly accept and manage risks. So we say to the person, these are your responsibilities and these are the risks that go along with that. And these are our responsibilities and the risks that go along with that. So we jointly accept and manage those risks. We know that consumers know that My Place is a service provider and we're not family. So I hear many people say in WA, we as a service, we're like family to these people. And if I hear any of our staff don't say that, we're not family. We're paid to be in people's lives, so we're very clear about those boundaries, about where we stand. We're friendly and we're really nice and we get on really well with people, but we're not a substitute family. Their family is their family, and that's what we always encourage. What we do know is that people are unhappy with what we're offering, they'll leave. And that's the power of individualised funding. It's attached to them and they can leave if they're not happy. So these are just, from our experience, some of the key ingredients of operating a self-directed support service. Keep the service administratively and industrially separate from other services the organisation operates. Active Foundation in WA is one of the biggest providers. It is the biggest provider in WA. We've done some consultancy with them because they offer what I would call traditional services, and they want to move over to shared management or individualised arrangements. So we've done some consultancy with them. And one of the things I kept saying to them is you need to keep this separate from your current services because they're not going to stop offering those services. They want to keep offering those. I think they should continue to offer those. But if you blend it together, having a contract arrangement that's a common law contract versus an enterprise bargaining agreement, those two things are not going to work out together, and the unions are going to pick you off somewhere along the line. So we say to organisations, keep it separate. Appoint a board that is committed to handing over service control to people with disabilities and have an appetite for change, innovation and manage risk. Throughout our whole organisation, people know from our corporate service team to our field staff to me to our board, and know that our goal is to shift as much power and control over to the person with a disability, as much as the person wants and as much as we're prepared to go across given our contractual arrangements with government. So that's absolutely through our whole organisation that we allow that to happen. But obviously appoint a management team that can build that culture, articulate clear and consistent service approach. So we're very clear about what is shared management, what is self-management, what is provider managed, so that people know what they can get from us. They know they're very clear about their expectations from us. And build a suite of policies and procedures that are coherent with the principles and values of self-directed support from the outset. We always test our policies to A, make sure that they're relevant, and B, that they support self-directed services. So if they don't, we don't have them. Establish an efficient data management and payroll system that allows people with disabilities to have as much control. We're about to do, so our database system is called MyBase, and we're about to do MyBase V2, we're calling it, version 2. And within that, we're hoping to have real-time budgeting and expenditure. So a person with a disability can go in, log in at any time, and they can see how much of their funding has been spent and how much is left and stuff like that. So provide people with disabilities timely and accurate information. As I said, we give people every 2 months a budget update. So we say this is how much you got from DSC, this is how much you should have spent today, this is how much you have spent, and you're overrun by that much. It's a very simple one-page form. It doesn't have to be complicated, it's just a very simple one-page form. And that's really important if people are managing their own supports, because they want to know where are they going with this stuff. So that's really important. Seek proper advice regarding legal, financial, industrial taxation arrangements. I can't stress this enough. You'll work with colleagues in the sector. I work with colleagues who will tell me that they believe this is the right legal interpretation of that. And I think we're all lay lawyers, and in some respects, I can only strongly suggest you get your own legal advice, which is what we've done, because at the end of the day, we're letting down people with disabilities if we don't get that advice on their behalf. So when we went into private and domestic arrangements and the payments that are tax-free through the host families, we got legal advice around that to make sure we're doing the right thing. Because what I say to families when I meet with them, if you do a shared management arrangement, you do all the stuff that you need to get your service and supports and all that up and running. What we'll do is we'll do all the stuff to keep you legal and safe. So that's the expectations they have of us. So we provide them with template contracts that will protect them from litigation, risk and financial loss. And if you are doing it within a current service arrangement that you have at the moment that may not sit comfortably with shared management or self-directed services, we would just strongly suggest you brand it completely different so that it does look different to what you're currently doing. And that's decisions you as an organisation would need to make, whether that's appropriate or not. So just to quickly talk about Individualised Solutions Australia. One of the things that my place has always done is managed its growth. We're a popular organisation in WA because of what we offer, so we could have doubled our size, no problems at all. But we didn't want to do that because if we do, we lose the essence of where we're at. So for example, in our provider managed, where all of our coordinators are, we've capped our growth there at what it is now. So, and the reason we did that is because I can keep replicating, put another coordinator on and have another 11 consumers that sit under that person. But what I would have to do is get another manager eventually, and then I'd need an assistant and all that sort of stuff. So we decided to cap that growth around provider managed, and so we haven't grown that for about 3 or 4 years now. But shared management, we do grow that because that's popular, and because the burden back on the organisation, or the requirement back on the organisation, is less than what it is if you're providing those services. So shared management is our growth area. We absolutely do that. Not a lot of people do it in WA, and so that's the other reason we want to offer it, particularly in regional areas. Not a lot of organisations do that. That goes well until you tell the funder that's what you're doing, and they get pretty pissed off fairly quickly if you're saying, I'm not going to provide any more services. So we wanted to contribute back to the sector, and so we recognise that there's organisations that want to move into this space but aren't quite sure what to do. So we established Individualised Solutions Australia, which is licensing arrangements with organisations that want to do this, and effectively this is what FaHCSIA, Individualised Solutions Australia, provides. So we provide template forms, template letters, policies, procedures, contracts, resource manuals, a template website, so the database that I talk about, we provide that as a shell for your organisation. So one of the organisations we support, it's called One-to-One, and through a licensing arrangement, and their database is called, I think it's called OneBase or something. So we provide the shell of it, and they populate it with all their brand and all that sort of stuff. And this is all updated on a regular basis through a licensing arrangement. We provide an electronic database that's accessed by a VPN, and it's secure. It's an electronic database that has consumer and employee details information, has a payroll function, leave accrual, document upload, all those sorts of things you would expect from a database. We do the taxation array on behalf of people with monthly, quarterly reporting. We process accounts payable, receivable. We do all the GST stuff that needs to happen, and BAS statements, all that sort of stuff that is boring and people don't want to do. Through a licensing arrangement, we do all that on behalf of people through a shared management approach. So it's not what you would normally provide through your organisations. It's purely through a shared management approach. So again, that gives ultimate control to the consumer, the person with a disability, allows you as an organisation to, well, I'm going to concentrate on the service part of it, but not on the bureau type of stuff that needs to happen. So through FaHCSIA, we will do all that bureau stuff for you, and then it allows you to do that. We also give you support in terms of, you know, are we doing this right? Are we starting to creep back into provide and manage to our traditional services? So we give you that support until you have a dedicated person who will support you with that stuff. So, we're going for time. I might just quickly touch on the NDIS and how I see that it connects in. So people are aware it's now called Disability Care Australia. Encourage people, if you can, go and if you feel the way that I do, dispute the name. If you talk about Care Australia, it already starts from a deficit point of view. So I would encourage people to go on the forum and dispute the name, but there you go. So just briefly, it's passed through legislation March this year, so it has gone through legislation. Trial sites were selected in South Australia, Tasmania, the ACT, Hunter region of New South Wales and Barwon region of Victoria. Just prior to the legislation passing, there was an extensive set of rules that were sent out. I'm not sure if people have had a chance to read those rules, but it's probably the part that concerns me the most, because if you look at the legislation, how it was introduced to Parliament, it sounded very good, it sounded very flexible, it sounded very giving a lot of control to the person with a disability, and then these set of rules come out, and as is with all federal governments, it now is becoming a little bit more prescriptive, a lot more directed by the federal government. So, but it's passed now, so this is probably what we're going to be living with. Most states have signed up to the NDIS. WA, we're not sure what WA is doing really. I'll talk about our My Way project, which is linking it with it, but I think one of the reasons we haven't signed up for it is that there's some concerns around the amount of money, the grandfather clause. I know that was one of the issues, because you know, seriously in WA, because we've got all that beautiful red stuff up in the north of our state that we can sell to people, our people in WA are really funded really quite well. I think in my place the average funding that a person gets is around about $75,000 a year currently, and it's indexed every year. But people, it's not uncommon for people to have $150,000 currently every year going forward. So I think that's one of the issues for WA, is that what will that mean if we sign up to an NDIS? And with there being no grandfather clausing, that's going to have a massive impact on some of the people that we support. So still unclear how it's going to be funded. I think everyone's aware of that, and the name's changed to Disability Care Australia. What I do see as some of the opportunities is that it is an entitlement to funding rather than the current lottery system. I'm not sure how it works here in New South Wales, but in WA, basically people put in an application. We have 3 funding rounds a year, and people have to tell their story, and it has to be critical, it has to be urgent, it has to be desperate, it has to be homeless, it has to be all those sorts of things before you'll get funding. And we have 350 people in WA who have applied and who still haven't been funded. So, so that is a lottery system as to who can tell the worst story, basically, to get it. So that is an advantage. There is an entitlement to funding. It's got bipartisan support from both sides of government. If it comes in how they're talking about it's going to come in, it will be predictable and equitable. So you'll know what funding you've got. It hopefully will be portable around Australia. It will be equitable, so there will be some transparency about allocation of funding. So that provides a bit of predictability, hopefully. The legislation as it reads allows control and authority to the consumer, and I'll qualify that with the set of rules that is coming out as well. So, but as it reads, it does give a lot of control and authority to the consumer, albeit they may have to purchase stuff that the government prescribes you have to purchase rather than what you want. Allows for responsiveness and flexibility in our approaches, and gives an opportunity for us to reshape our services in the future, I think. If money is going directly to consumers and then they come and purchase the services, that certainly means we've got to reshape our services. Some of the challenges, as I see it, the word self-direction or self-directed services, it becomes a flavour of the day, and our understanding of that is at risk of perversion. I hear some of our organisations in WA talking about providing self-directed services or self-managed services or shared managed services. and really they're not doing that. It's just they're calling it that because that's what they need to call it, because the government will fund it if it's called that. So an example of that is a person in the group home will now sit on an interview panel to decide who comes in their house, and they're saying we do self-directed services. Well, my argument is you should have been doing that anyway. So maintaining responsiveness and flexibility in our approaches, I think that's a challenge for us about how we do that. What type of and how do we offer services in the future? That's going to be challenging for all of us about how we go about doing that. Federal and state relationships. At the moment, WA gets some funding from Canberra, but most of our disability services are funded by the state, so therefore we don't have that sort of argy-bargy between Canberra and WA. If the National Disability Insurance Scheme is going to be administered by Canberra, then there's a potential for that sort of relationship to have that argument, if you like, and we all know about what happens there. I think the challenge is the capacity of the current disability sector, to provide the services. If a lot more people are going to get funded, I'm not sure as providers we can just automatically pick that up. So I think that there needs to be some work around how we're going to prepare the sector to meet this influx of people wanting services. Workforce issues, if we continue to move with the NDIS where people potentially will get direct funding themselves, then our workforce is going to look a lot different to what it looks now. And stuff like private and domestic arrangements are going to become more important. So I think that's a challenge for all of us about how we deal with workforce issues in the future. And I just think cultural change issues within our sector as well. I mean, people are going to come to us, not as clients, but as consumers. They're going to want to purchase something from us. And therefore, we've got to change the way that we offer services, I think, to people. Can I say these are my thoughts as well, so they're not, they're general in nature, shall I say. So if you think about this, in WA at the moment, person gets funded, it has to go through a disability support organisation or local area coordination, and then the money goes out to a client. If we think about the NDIS, this is what it could look like in the future. The funding goes directly to the, not client, but now consumer, who then can go and purchase their services. So MWC is My Way Coordinator. That's the, I'll talk a little bit about that shortly, but it's our local area coordination program in WA. And then they will come to a disability support organisation and purchase whatever services they may want. They may go to a local area coordinator, which is what they previously did, or they may just go to generic services in the community. So if that happens, that really does put the person with the disability in a really strong position as a consumer, that they can go and purchase the services that they want. And hence the services we're offering have to be relevant, and that's, I think, a challenge for all of us to ensure that that happens. So if I think about my place, where we are as an organisation, and the NDIS comes in, I think this is what we will offer in the future going forward. But I think our provider managed area is probably going to become weaker, because I think more and more people will be able to have control around through shared coordination, shared management or self-management. And this is a hunch I have at the moment. So therefore I'm seeing that our provider management will need to shift more down toward this arrangement. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's fantastic, because it still, again, gives more control down to the person with the disability. What is important is that whilst I'm saying we need to shift that control, we need to make sure the person is supported to accept that control, because it can sound great, but some people do need support to do that, and I'm not discounting that. And that's me done. And I'm happy to take any questions or challenges or points of clarification. I'm happy to take those.
I just wanted to ask a question about your data management and payroll system that you talked about, that you then license on. Is that was that developed in house? That's not a generic product. Okay. Yeah.
One of our guys was out the front having a smoke, and he talked to the guy next door who does databases, and that's how it all emerged. So
don't you love that?
It's very organic.
Yeah.
And that's the reason we have to do MyBase version 2, because it's too organic.
Right.
So everyone, one of the MyBase is that we're not short on confidence with our egos, and so we all have an opinion what should be in the database. And and most of those opinions have been put into the database, and now it's become a little bit unwieldy. So we're just refining that. So most of it's fantastic, but it's very organic. So what the licensee will get is the shell of the database. If they want to enhance that, they do that themselves because at back end it's too hard for us to manage. But any enhancements we do, we offer that to our licensees and say that we've done this because it's not working or whatever.
And in regards to your common law contracts, because obviously that provides you with the flexibility to do the self-managed. Like it's like an extended version of an attended care where you can actually go in for an hour and all that. And I suppose for most of us, we operate within an environment where there's usually a minimum, 2 hours, 3 hours. So with the common law contract, is that something that My Way sort of championed with, or was it already there and available that you were able to tap into as far as an option?
I think, from my understanding, private and domestic arrangements apply in WA. I think they may apply in Queensland. I don't think they apply in other states. So we knew they were there from our arrangement. And carers WA, so there's a family members who are carers, they really championed that previously, so around the private and domestic arrangement. So it was really their initiative that did this. What we did is we got some legal advice about, as an organisation, if we're going to do it, how would we go about doing that. So it really is a WA specific type thing. I'm pretty sure you can, it's just a common law contract, I'm sure every state allows for common law contracts. So it's really championed by Carers WA, and we've just taken it and tried to strengthen it. So if I can just clarify, when I say people come in for half an hour, people may come in for half an hour, but the person may pay them $100 for coming in for that half an hour. So people are sensible around what they do. They know there's a marketplace there, and if you don't pay people enough, they won't stay. I mean, it's just the reality of life. So whilst I make it sound wonderful that you come in for half an hour and you get paid half an hour's pay, you usually pay quite well for that half an hour. That's tricky to get yourself up in the morning. I'll just go here first.
Yeah, can I just check? Sorry. The people you employ by the organisation are not employed under these, are they?
No. We
So
have a proper industrial arrangement.
Right, that's what I assume. So it's only applicable because it is an individual employing someone in a domestic arrangement, a private.
So we have a proper industrial arrangement. We have set rates of pay, base rates, weekly penalties, all that sort of stuff within the organisation. And we use that as a guide for people in shared management. We say, well, our hourly rate is this, and we know that we're getting people come in to work for us, so therefore people typically use that as a guide.
Great, thank you.
Just my question, with these PAs employed under the common law contracts, has there been any, I was just wondering about the longevity of the staff, have you done any sort of, I guess, measure that? I'm just wondering how that goes in comparison to obviously what we sort of know as
turnover rate.
Yeah, just a comparison, I guess.
So, our evidence suggests that people in those arrangements, shared management arrangements, stay around longer than if they're with our organisation. And the reason for that is that they form, or we believe the reason for that is they form a strong connection, relationship type with not only the person with a disability, but perhaps their family members as well. So we have some workforce issues in our organisation where we struggle to get people, like that's just common in the whole sector. And we have some very long-term arrangements as well. So, but in shared management, typically people will stay with that person for a longer period of time. And because the person is the employer, they've got flexibility. If the person's going to leave, they may say, well, why are you going to leave? If I paid you an extra $5 an hour.
What can I do to make this work better? Okay, thank you.
Darren, can I explore with you the comments and the concepts of the setting up that you spoke about? Some of what you said about separation is in line with the thoughts of Michael Kendrick that we've heard in respect of dealing with a person one at a time and setting up something that might work differently, even though you might have a traditional provider structure, etc. It really intrigues me as to how that might occur. So our organisation, like many, is a traditional provider and have all the traditional structures and relationships in place, etc. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong, and all that kind of stuff. I find it challenging to get my mindset into how you could actually set up something that's separate but connected because you're setting it up within or separate to the organisation that is going to be so completely different. And can I just unfold that a bit more? And are there other examples of where other organisations have actually taken this on and are in the process of doing something of this kind?
I mean, there's a couple. So the organisation was very about one-to-one who we license with. So they are their own separate organisation. They have a licensing arrangement with us, and we do all that stuff for them. So that's fun. Arranging how they do that. We have some people not through a licensing arrangement, but set up micro boards. So a board set up around a person with a disability spirit, and they run as a completely separate sort of entity to my place organisation. What we do is we just provide the support for that board to run it. So, some organisations, like Active, for example, that organisation I spoke about, they're going to set up a department in shared management or whatever they're going to call it. That's risky because it will just sort of something else pull back in. So, some organisations have spoke to us about setting up a completely separate board. So, like for example, My Place WA and My Place Foundation, they're completely separate. They're two separate boards. So that's how we make that separation. So there's ways you can do it. What I'm just saying is that if you've got traditional arrangements around industrial relations, around all that sort of stuff, and then you're setting up private and domestic contracts, criminal contracts here, you're at risk because the unions are just going to come in and have a look at this stuff. Now, we were challenged by the union around this, and there's nothing they could do because it was deemed that it would sit out, it's a common law contract, it sits outside of industrial relations. So that's all we're saying is a safeguard, try and keep it separate as you possibly can. And you can do that through a licensing arrangement, through setting up a separate board, setting up a micro board. Just running it as one of your departments, I think, would be good, but branding it completely different. So calling it something active, should maybe call it reactive or something like that. So just so that there is that separation, because what also happens is you want it to run different. So with shared management and self-management, that sits under My Place WA. Shared coordination and provider management sits under My Place Foundation. So they're completely separate how we do that. We make sure we keep those separate. That's how we maintain it. So I don't know whether that helps.
Yeah, it's sort of getting there. My envisaging mind is working here, and it's almost as if people will vote with their feet. People in organisations will vote with their feet and say, well, look, I really subscribe to a different methodology of service delivery for people who want to buy whatever they want to buy. I don't think that can be done within organisation A. So we're going to go and do something else out here and set up. It seems to me that perhaps, and you might comment on this, but perhaps there'll be a creation of opportunities for individuals that are entrepreneurial that want to set things up totally outside of where they might be now within organisations, and organisations will have to cope with a whole raft of new competitors who are going to do something differently, and then either live or die on the basis of the vine that they're sitting on. So if you extrapolate 10 years, like organisations like ours, we're looking out 3, 5, 10 years all the time. In 10 years' time, we're going to be looking at a completely different landscapes where the large kind of deliverer of a multiplicity of services is really going to struggle to actually have relevance. Do you want to comment on that?
I'm not sure you're going to struggle, but I think that old business adage, adapt or die, I think is absolutely relevant at the moment, because the self-directed services is putting control and authority within the hands of the consumer, and so therefore, if the service you're providing is what people want, they'll be coming to want it. If it's not, then they're going to go somewhere else. And I think that's the, if you look at the horizon, that's what you've got to always ask yourself, is what I'm providing what people want? So in WA, we've got vacancies in group homes now, first time ever in 27 years I've been involved. So therefore, people don't want that, people want something different. So therefore, as an organisation, you need to adapt your business model because you're not offering what people want. So you know, sometimes we, I don't think we link disability services with what happens in the business world. It's exactly the same. If you're not offering what people want, they will go somewhere else. And that's what I think is going to happen, is people are going to be offering.
Could I ask you, what is your target group? You did mention people without intellectual disability running businesses,
Yes.
and then you mentioned people with an intellectual disability. So
Yes.
what is the level of disability?
So we support anyone with a disability other than mental health. We don't do mental health services. So it can be physical, intellectual, neurological, acquired brain injury, sensory disability. So it's any sort of.
So if that person can't speak for themselves, they need interpreters, they don't have the ability at all to negotiate, do you then provide that service, or do they have to then seek out? And I agree with David, we're seeing already the therapy type groups and everything starting up, waiting for the NDIS to come in. So going back to my question, do you provide that interpreter service as part of your role, or does that person who may not have a family or even an advocate have to find the interpreter themselves?
We would, if they need an interpreter service, we would find an interpreter service. We don't provide, we would find an interpreter service on their behalf. And we're also very strong on people having independent advocates. So we don't want to be the decision maker about your life. So we will elicit family members, we will elicit public guardians if we need to, we will elicit, we've got an organisation called People with Disabilities WA, and they're an advocacy agency, we will engage those. So we will always try and not be the decision maker because we're a service provider, we're not a decision maker.
So there's a whole new service type that will have to be set up in New South Wales, because traditionally we don't have a lot of advocates involved in our services. And so this is where my dilemma with the service I run, people who are deaf and blind, that, and I find it very hard to get an advocate. So that's going to be something that you will have to be, thinking about.
I mean, if you can, someone who's naturally connected with the person is who we always try and work with.
I mean, do you see the danger of going back to the house parent model? As you're talking, I'm seeing, and we talk about the older disability workers who have the old paradigm, or worked in that paradigm, that they think they know best for that person and they connect with the family, then they rule the life of that disabled person. Do you see that, the danger of that, or do you?
Absolutely, yeah. I see our home sharer, which is host family. Talk about things as a CEO, what keeps you awake at night, that's some of the stuff that keeps me awake at night. Because it's vulnerable, people are living in a family home that isn't theirs, and so my place could become my room, stay in this room. And we have had situations where that's happened, and we've had to intervene and rescue that person out of there. Now that's bad on our part, that we A, chose that family, and B, that we allowed it to happen and got to that point. But we also have the inherent belief that if people are offering their home, they're doing it for all the right reasons. And so our training that we provide in my place is very values-based. So there's a lot of clinical stuff. It talks about how we set up a home. It talks about ownership, about how is the person. So one of the things we say to a home sharer is, one of the questions we say is, if they want to invite their friends over, what's your rules, or what's the family dynamic around that? Now, if they say, well, they can only come on Sundays between 4 and 5, they won't be a home sharer because that's.
So that leads me to my final question. Are you involved in planning the individual plans, the person-centred plans, to ensure that is? How do you monitor that if you're very separate?
How we monitor it is by purely managing our caseload numbers. So our coordinators work with 11 people. So therefore, we don't have an annual planning ground, if you like, because what I say is as a coordinator working with 11 people, you should be able to have these discussions almost on a daily basis about where people are going. You do have to have some future planning because A, our funder requires it, and B, some people do need it. I mean, it's not just a daily thing that happens. So yeah, but that's how we manage our planning is through coordinators having the right amount of numbers so that they can do that. So, and that's important about getting to know the person.
Yeah. So now I know where it fits.
One last question from you, Peter, and then we'll move into discussion.
I'd be interested, like, you talked about the type of clients that you have and just whether you've got any sort of age limit to that, and perhaps you could follow up with just if you do get, you've got private and domestic employment where the individual has that employer role. If they did band together in not a group home but in a combination sort of home of some kind, maybe it's a group home but I don't want to call it that, but it's their choice anyway, would they still have the one number or when some of the resources were shared, or is that a completely different model?
Completely different model because what we say is you can only you're the employer for this person. So if it's a family member who's the employer on behalf of the person with disability, they can't be the employer on behalf of this other person. They can be, technically they can be, but what we say you're at risk because now you're sharing resources, you're compromising care and support that's needed. People will end in tears, is typically what we would think is going to happen. So we just say, be the employer for this one person. If that person meets someone, so we've got a guy that we support, he's met someone who's she lives in a group home, and they're about to get engaged, and so through a friendship, and so now they're going to move in together eventually and set up house and all that sort of stuff. They both need support, and so my place will provide them with the support that they need. So it can happen. It's just more about how they sort of come together as the critical thing. So, but if families said, well, we want to now band with this family, and we want our sons and daughters to start living together, and they didn't know each other, we would probably say we're not the right organisation to support you because we're pretty strong on that stuff. And then all of a sudden we would have that, slippery slope stuff where you do one and then you'll do two and then you'll do three and then all of a sudden we're providing stuff that's not our brand. And I'm not critical of group homes at all. There's a place for that. Just saying that's not our brand. That's not what we do. We choose not to do that. So I would say no, it can't happen because the focus will move away from that one person to two people and then compromise and all that sort of stuff will happen. So.
Well, Darren, thanks very much. I won't thank you officially because after we have our discussion, we wish to hear from you again. But I did take quite a few notes, and I think many of the things that you've said were encapsulated in your first comment, which is that your organisation is about the shift. And I think if we are going to support people in a way that's possible, it is that letting go of control. I think if I come back to David's point, if organisations do wish to move on, I think that's one of the major issues. Will boards of management let go of control? Will upper management support boards, or the other way around, to franchise out? Because I think the doing of it's not the hard part. The technical part, for me, is not the hard part. It's whether an organisation can envisage itself as no longer being in control. So it seems that your organisation is very values-driven, and one person it sounds to me as though it's a group of like-minded people that are very clear about what their values are. And just your last comment, you say to somebody, well, that sounds fine, but that's not what we offer. So I've got a lot out of listening to.
Well, no, I've gone head-to-head with campers where we're given notice because they want us to set up a group home, and I said that's not what we do, and so we'll transition you to a new organisation and all sorts of complaints that happen. But we're strong on our values and we have to stick by those values, and so compromises that we may upset some values. And we're very clear about what we do.
Sam to bring it up. So it's the same system as previously. We've got 4 tables running. There may be some people that might like to join this table as well. And one facilitator, somebody to record the dialogue. We're finding these records very useful in preparing our own thinking around what we should be putting in the blueprint for change. But if I can just remind you now of the first question, and I think Darren's presentation leads into these. So the first discussion at the tables is, okay, we've heard Darren's presentation, we've heard what iPlace is, we've heard about this value-driven organisation that seems to fit very well with the vision of the NDIS. So what are the possibilities that you'll be able to co-create? Because that's the block missing under ownership, meaning working with people with disability, working with families. So one of the possibilities that listening to Darren has brought up for you arising from hearing about the iPlace model, first question. So if we could invite you to do that, then we'll take the feedback and then we'll move on to the next one. So anybody want to work the table before we can do it before? And we're going to begin. So thanks, David. What are the possibilities from your table that have arisen out
to directly answer your question.
Very good. I'm glad somebody is directly answering it.
We don't know.
That's okay. That's a very helpful.
We got to the point of much
David, we just have free attention.
Yeah,
David,
much discussion around. And I guess we encapsulated at the end of this 15 minutes that if we're going to create an environment where people who are in need of services want to exercise and can create choice and independence, how can that be achieved through a mechanism whereby services are provided by external organisations or bodies or whatever? So at what point does the choice of an individual be circumvented by somebody else, be that a family member or an organisation or a coordinator or whatever? So the fundamental question that we couldn't come to grips with was how do you overlay, or what overlay of choice impedes a person's individual access to the services they want to buy? So at the moment we're all connected with organisations that have their own bureaucracies, organisational issues, policy and procedures and the whole gamut. And all of these things somehow or other mitigate against individuals exercising choice because they've got to fit in with the organisational view, that sort of stuff.
Possibility B, to break free.
Yes, and yes.
Yes, but.
Yes, but with
how capture breaking free.
We couldn't sort of describe. We couldn't co-create that from where we are now within our organisations. It seemed to us also, I think, Lena talked of the experiences of families assisting their family members to actually have access through small levels of organisation, individual or a couple of individuals and so on. But to do it where you've got 100 or more people currently in an organisational structure and to set something else up that's different to that is a really big challenge. Because but it's a possibility. But
okay.
That's where we were. It's a tricky question.
Okay.
Is that about it?
Yeah. You did well.
Very well.
Okay. So should we go to the back table? Who have we got there? Adele, it's you.
Okay, so we're talking about like some of the things that we can quite literally do when we get back to our organisations. Really, Celeste works on a supervisor level. So she was saying, really made her think that she could really spend more time with the person and their family and their supporters to really find out what her particular program isn't doing at the moment and the gaps that she could fill in. she's saying, you know, that sometimes it's hard to prioritise that because you've got the really sort of instant things that you've got to do with clients and with staff and with programming and shifts and all that kind of stuff. So reprioritising the time to listen.
So reprioritising, just to give Claire a little time to
and
get it done. Okay, great.
Something we could practically do that's probably a bit more bigger picture when we were talking about, because you know, all of us are in organisations that have been around for 60 plus years. So trying to, if we were to do something that was a little bit outside of Northcote and Wingate, that maybe we could start with circles of support. So something that's actually run by the person and their family members and their support circles. So encouraging education around circle of support,
yes.
how you set up your circles of support or micro boards, whatever you'd like to call it, and have that as the smaller startup organisation while you're still running your programs at the moment and doing the things that we've traditionally done for so long, and putting person-centredness and embedded in there, but to really be able to go, hang on a sec, let's start fresh over here.
Okay,
so do another arm that's actually run by the person and their support people. Shirley was saying that she would like to just see a bit more patience, that it would be a really simple, nice thing for people to just be a bit more patient.
Yeah, good point, Shirley.
And Ben, on the back of that said, you know, patience to be listened to. Just want people to listen to us a bit more.
Yeah.
And that all of that Ben was saying is just and so was Celeste, is that's just that really big culture change and that letting go, as Darren was saying, that letting go of our power and sometimes I guess that an organisation and workers as individuals being able to step back and go, it's kind of okay to not be needed. It's better that you're able to do this a bit more by yourself. So that is that scary leap of like when you feel that you're not needed as a service, then oh my gosh, do I have a job? Am I redundant? Am I even a service anymore? So being able to stretch out. And then finally, Ben was saying about, you know, one of the things that would, or he's fortunate enough to already choose his staff and all that kind of stuff. So we were just talking about the staff matching. That's one of the things that we could co-create from, you know, the moment we get back into the office. It's about having a real say with who you spend time with as staff members at the moment.
Okay, so rich discussion. Thank you. Who's the feedback? Julie, it's you. The feedback.
Okay. We talked in terms of looking at identifying where in the organisation co-creation can occur.
Okay, locating co-creation, whereabouts. Yeah, good.
We acknowledge, like the other tables, that all of us around the table are in organisations that have existing structures, legislation and things that we operate within, and so we're not starting with a sort of clean slate, we're starting from a different position that we might change, or we do need to change. Conversations in the organisations need to happen about what we will do and what we won't do.
Okay, so conversations happening.
And that we need to look at challenging our existing view on how we respond to the block or programme funding that we occur at the moment, and looking for ways in which we can become much more flexible for the individual and actually challenging that with the funders rather than just taking money and
Okay.
themselves.
Thanks very much. I like to, you know, trying to sort of figure out where you can co-create together as a starting point. And then moving through to looking at the block funding and what are the implications of that for the move. So thank you. And the last table is the Liz.
So I think we didn't focus quite on the co-create aspect of our question, and instead we're a bit introspective and thought about the organisational possibilities. So we first of all wondered how ADAC will respond and be supportive of the My Place model, seeing as it's, you know, really interesting. It'd be interesting to know how they might meet those challenges, particularly as at the moment we asked Darren whether there was any fundraising, that he did any fundraising. He said no, and at the moment Sunshine was saying we do a lot of fundraising to kind of top up the ADAC stuff. We also thought one of the possibilities might be a quarantine model, maybe a licensing model that might provide a kind of new mode of delivery. And we were having a kind of vibrant discussion about the kind of cultural shift that's necessary, particularly around that employee allegiance, because traditionally, it's to the organisation, and that shift from a support worker being their allegiance shifting to a person rather than an organisation. Is quite an interesting one, and then we had a discussion about the casualisation of the workforce, which is kind of sounds like an inevitable trend of your model.
It certainly is a shift, isn't it? That the shift is to the person and not the organisation. Yeah. So Claire, this is the right time for you to feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what are some of the possibilities that you will be able to co-create, having just listened to Darren talk about My Place? So some of the things that have come up are there's going to have to be a cultural change or a culture shift, including shifting allegiance for people from moving away from being aligned with the organisation to being aligned with people. There'll be challenges existing views, and within the organisation, really starting those conversations and not being afraid to have conversations so that you can co-create within the organisation. Encouraging people, one idea is to encourage people to run circles of support and reprioritising time to listen and get to know what people really want, and to do all of this with patience. And just some questions or concerns like how will ADAC respond? And also with regards to people's choice, there's some uncertainty about the point where other people step into being.
Did we capture it all? Okay, that's great. Thank you. So now, normally we've said for the facilitator to stay at the table, but this time, why don't we just all move around and then just appoint a new facilitator? So that would be good to
Very lucky. This whole notion of
shall we start
people with intellectual disabilities.
with your table, Celeste?
And how many we all know all the families who kind of say, no, this is what I want to do. Would you like to live back?
Who's feedback?
Normalisation was found to be only as good as the care.
It's me.
Looks like it's me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
and much of it really was about, to a degree, there's the risk in not doing anything. So obviously under the NDIS and a whole new environment that's coming in, we have that risk of not doing anything. But the greatest problem that we see in taking that leap and going to, say, a strategy or structure that My Place is offering is that the organisational change, that cultural change, that being able to have leaders that want to actually take us in that direction. So there's a huge problem in that to get to the actual, before you would start talking about the risks of applying that kind of model. So we kind of, we kept stopping and coming back to that in a way, really. Really the risk, again, too, is how to ensure, that's how we keep coming back to it, that the people that we're caring for are receiving that service. And really what we kept coming back to, really, when you apply that kind of model, really we're taken out of that in a way, where we're creating the structure, we're creating the model, and we're facilitating it. However, then it's leaving it to the actual individual to make their own mistakes. And so that's the hardest thing for us to get to that risk point. Very nice one, the risk of even talking about it with an organisation and taking it to that higher level. And similarly, you'd have to be concerned about, and this would be how you'd set up your structure, the reputational risk if things didn't work out quite so well. And that would be something that you'd have to take into consideration.
Oh, good. Thank you. Some fine risks identified. Okay, so Ben, is it you?
Yeah. That's right. Well, we discussed quite a few things actually. First, we just came up with a quote and it was like the greater the risk, the greater the reward could potentially be.
Very good.
And then we sort of discussed from a consumer's point of view, like as in terms of risk as well as organisational. So in terms of consumer, we discussed the dignity of risk as opposed to the individual's choice, wants and needs. And then we talked about, well, I discussed how I was willing to take a massive risk, even though I understand there could be a dramatic mistake or something could fail, which is just life really. But at the end of the day, if it does work out, the reward that could be at the end of that risk could be the service that I really want, and just the quality of life for the consumer could be absolutely amazing. In terms of organisational views or risks, so we identified that the risks were,
They come through the funding, the board.
yeah, so through the funding and the board, legislation-wise, and just really like letting go, like we sort of discussed before. And the risks developed from so funding bodies and government funds, as well as state laws. And we also discussed about not only organisations letting go, but also like families of consumers as well letting go. Like, just personally, I know if I went home tonight and said to my mum, I'm going to move to Perth because they're also. Mum would be like, no, what are you talking about? So it's just like it's important. It's like it's important for organisations to let go, but I think more importantly, it's definitely like that family base. Like if the consumer has the support of them, I think that's all they need really.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Ben. I think your comment about how your parents would react it brings us right back to the reality.
Yes.
So thank you for that. That's great. And this table here, is it you, Julie, or Carly?
No.
Carly.
So basically we're discussing, we were encouraging families to have great input to make demands and comments on our services, and so actually asking the hard questions to families could actually give us, one, that's a risk in itself, but also a greater insight as to how families are willing to go to take risks as well. The balancing of risk, it can be quite tricky both organisationally but also through individuals, where that sits either within a large organisation or small organisations, to define actually what our services are going to be and how we're going to balance against that. And then at the moment I think that organisations are struggling a little bit is because the risk versus the liability. So it seems that all the liability is going on to one organisation, and whether that's through not consulting with families enough or whatever that is, families are willing to take those risks but haven't quite come to grasp with the liability or with the responsibility in which those risks and where they fall upon. So to determine and to sort of to weed through that, I think a lot of conversation needs to be had with organisations and actual families and people with disabilities.
Okay, so it's a work in progress.
Yes.
Thanks very much. And the last table?
So we talked, it's very attractive, I didn't draw this, it's very pretty. We talked a bit about the idea that the ultimate end point seems to be the idea that a traditional organisation doesn't exist. There is no real role for us, and that the idea of changing only so that we can maintain our organisation, we probably need to lose, because it may be that if we're genuinely behind this idea, that we have to be willing to consider that there just is no role for it, and if that's where we come to, then that's where we come to. The issues we have with that are about how relevant are current and future skills, because that would suggest that if somebody chooses to get Joe Blow down the road to come and support them, that's no different to a trained and skilled and motivated disability personal assistant, whatever term you use. And when I say motivated, it's somebody who's being challenged to provide outcomes rather than just outputs, and to has the skills to communicate with someone who may or may not be verbal, who is able to create possibilities for them and look beyond what somebody already knows and bring the world, create that engagement with the world. And that is a skill, and that is actually something that's been developed hopefully within all of our organisations for many, many years, and assuming that brings no relevance to people's lives is a little concerning, I guess, for us. And also that capacity for organisations to challenge families and their wants and needs for their person. There are obviously examples and instances where families have, either together or individually made decisions on behalf of somebody where their choices are not considered and they're not being given opportunities. And there are examples, I think Peter Brinkerhoff talked when he came over here, of an organisation that sued the organisation he helped shut down. It was never actually shut down because two families sued the state repeatedly to keep it open for two of their children because they refused absolutely to have them come out into the community, which so it's challenging. It's a very challenging thing, and part of our role might be to advocate and challenge. So we also then talked about WH&S risk or similar risks that organisations are in a better position to take on than individuals or their families, and how does that risk get, with responsibility and choice comes that risk, handing it back, and that we were not quite sure how comfortable we were with that, even though that was less risk for us, it was still, we felt an obligation in that. How much risk can individuals suggest and keep their job was a genuine risk, and at what point will people need to reassess if they're really passionate about this, whether that they can stay within the culture of their own organisation if it's not willing to change. Some of the things we can do in the meantime is look at focusing on changing outcomes, moving away from outputs to outcomes, so that we can assess whether or not we're at least creating those opportunities for choice without taking apart the structure that actually moderates those risks at the moment. That the whole purpose of the company legally was precisely to modify risk. So we're handing the risks back to individuals who don't have that protection. And so that's a shift from organisational risk to personal risk. If you're looking at these micro boards, and does that mean that they're not a company and therefore we're asking them to assume a whole level of risk that the company, again, had traditionally been to. And that we do believe, though, that the one-to-one personal assistant relationship, as was the experience that we heard about in my place, was that may actually create greater integrity in that relationship, and therefore moderate some of the kind of HR or IR risks that we have as an organisation we do struggle with because we're an organisation. So it's that. It sounds as though a lot of that's about the company structure, but it didn't sound like that when we talked about it.
It's very comprehensive.
Can I just give an example of that last point? If your employer is a person with a disability, it's a lot harder to phone up and say you're sick to that person who you know is not going to get out of bed than to phone your coordinator or supervisor and say I'm sick today and I can't go. So the strength of that relationship is quite incredible. So.
Absolutely. And we were talking about, we talk in HR circles that there's a 15% of stars, 70% of your workforce will be of followers, and 15% will be your either troublemakers or conspiracy theorists who will spend their entire time and energy trying to disrupt. I think those people would just either not be attracted to that relationship in the first place or wouldn't have that response because it's not the kind of them and us management, it's not the organisation, the victimless crime kind of idea. It's very clear who the victim is if you're trying to rip off your employer when it's one person, a vulnerable. Yeah, so great.
Sounds good. Have you worked out who you are?
Sorry. It had spooky resonance when somebody first told me those figures, so they stay with me.
Good to hear them again, I think. Claire, can you give us a little feedback?
It's really hard to capture the richness and the depth of the conversation in one or two words.
Yes.
So bear with me. So talking about the risks that people are willing to take and risks that the organisation is willing to take, just a few key things that have come out. The risk of letting go and making that change, and that's not just for the organisation but families as well. There's the risk of actually talking about it and taking it to that next step, taking it to a higher level. The organisation's reputation is also at risk. There's a nice quote there from Ben. The greater the risk, the greater the reward. There's also the risk of not doing anything at questions, even though we might not like the answers that we get. And defining the service, is it, moving forward, do we need to come up with a new name? That comes with risk as well. There was some conversation about what is the value of the skilled worker as well. And the workplace health and safety, outputs, moving from outputs to outcomes, that comes with risk. And also if you're looking at having different micro companies, then all the risks that come with one company, you end up with multiple.
Thanks, Claire. Well done. If I could just comment on Jackie's point about the skilled worker, and maybe the worker that's skilled, that's done the certificates, done the degrees, isn't what people are looking for anymore. What does that mean? Well, I must say I've come across that phenomenon quite a lot. You're at different conferences or you're at meetings and you might be with families who'll say, oh no, I don't want anybody that's trained. I would prefer to just ring up the local music company and get somebody that plays the violin, and I'll employ them to teach the guitar or the violin. So I've been thinking about that a lot because my background has been mainly in tertiary education, training people. But I think it goes back to what Darren said. If that's what families are saying, we're not giving the family what they want. So we need to think through that. What's the message for us? Is it just that nobody wants people that are trained anymore? Or is it what people do? I'm not too
May
sure.
I just be devil's advocate with that? I think it depends on the level of support somebody has and the kind of family involvement you're talking about. I think if you're talking about a family who is absolutely out there looking for the person to teach music, the person to... Fantastic. They don't need a trained disability support worker to tell them that what they need to do is provide opportunities for someone to extend their life. If you don't have that scenario, if you have somebody who traditionally lives in a group home and you're trying to look at how that might extend beyond, whose family have either are not around and not involved in their life at all, or who somebody just doesn't have family, or whose family say no to any possibility of risk or adventure or anything else that they try, what for that person then is that we're giving the family what they want by taking away any choice and opportunity that the person with the disability might be given. That doesn't sit ethically with me. It may be what families will buy and we can provide it in the marketplace, not a problem. Open marketplace, happy to do that. But that doesn't sit ethically with me at all. And I don't think it sits ethically with our organisation about what we're trying to do in our society or in our community as an organisation.
I think it comes back to the word balance. Because I think you can't... Often people, when they go home at night, they go back to the family. We're not there. So it's how to bring the families on board with maybe more informed choice that their family members want. Maybe you should offer your parents a trip to Western Australia. They can check it out.
I think there's an underlying philosophical position here too when I hear that kind of discussion, and I think it resonates with me with your comment about disability care Australia, is it? That I believe that to be an absolute minimalist description. So whoever has dreamed that up hasn't got a clue about what is going on, rightly or wrongly, in the world of the disability provider that's been evident for the last 20 years or so. And I hark back to the kind of conversations and studies that we've done in relation to Wolfensberger, the kind of inputs we have from people like Michael Kendrick, Peter Briggenhoff, which was a slightly different angle. But we're being encouraged to look at what we do in relation to enhancing the life experience of a person that happens to have a disability. It's never been for me about care. And I think that if we're going back to square one in relation to that disability funding is going to be associated with care, and that means anyone can give it according to the choices of the person that's buying the care. Well, I think that's not what I'm about anyway. And I just think there's a really deep kind of view about purpose here
And
that maybe needs to be unpacked.
And it's very surprising that they've chosen that name.
It's
Well
a
said.
lazy political thing, surely, just to match me.
Can I suggest, sometimes we finish these discussions before morning tea, but I think we will go on after morning tea. And, you know, so that you can have choice after morning tea, just choose which of the last questions when you get into the table that you'll actually discuss. And then we'll invite Darren to comment on just some points that have been raised for him in listening to our discussion. And then, of course, Shirley and Ben will also make a reflection, and that should really almost take us through. So morning tea for about a quarter of an hour, and we'd encourage you to take it out onto the deck, view of the Anzac Bridge, which is in that direction.
View of the facts of it, stop running.
Okay, folks, we'll feed back now.
I know they're supposed to be the drivers of the strategy, but if this is something we believe in and see as a good thing, then we're going to need to push that really, really hard.
I think we
Those books, you'll see in the notes as we go through, we do pull quite a bit out of the Sherlock one, and the notes for this time, down the side of your notes, I refer to a couple of pages taken from the Sturk book as well. And just remember that Stephen Sturk is going to be here and he's staying for a week. And I'm interested to know if any organisations would be keen to have him for a half a day or a day just to consult with. I've been
Yep.
financial arrangements with you, because that sort of covers so,
When is he going to be here?
when is that breakfast ceremony?
It's not the 18th, is it?
The next time it's with the sergeant who's now heading up disability services in Canberra. First of May, so he's here in the last week in July.
I fly in. That I will be just going over to see.
Are you going to be?
No, with Helen. With Helen.
Oh, with Helen. Anyway, we can talk. Yes. So let's get some feedback. The top table, is it you or who's feeding back? Tell us the question.
Do you want to feedback?
I think it might be your turn.
There are two things really.
We did the last one on ownership.
Okay, great.
And again, it probably sort of varies a little bit depending on sort of the size or the structure of an organisation, but it's trying to identify within each of the organisations where you can, where's the natural point of introducing a new way of thinking and a new way of relating between staff and people with disabilities and their families. There's some activities that you'd be hitting your head up against a brick wall. So you may as well identify a natural opportunity to then create the examples and the stories that then provides the rest of the organisation a sense of what it all means. I think again it's been very clear about defining what you want to do, what's the activities you want to be involved in, and what you don't want to be involved in. And it's almost having those conversations at the beginning rather than sort of halfway through.
Okay.
So you're understanding more where you're going to operate.
Yeah.
Similar to what Darren's done.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. We'll move through this quite quickly so we can hear Darren and the reflections from Shirley and me. So this table.
Yeah, well, excuse me, we chose the last question as well, and just very quickly, so the three of us are on our formal roles on our executive team in our organisation. So with that context in mind, we thought two things, being the catalyst for conversation, having important conversations was about owning that involvement, and looking at ways to include the board in the new conversations, and introducing a new way of thinking to the board were quite important as well. So they were two things.
Yeah, that sounds great. I know in our person-centred champions program, sometimes we've done exercises where people have a stem of an opening sentence, just to talk about what it means to be person-centred, so maybe there could be a stem of a sentence to get yourself in and around some of the CEOs that we all work with about individualised funding. So thanks for that, Michael. Ms. Taylor, where did we get to?
Well, we had a bit of a breakdown, but it's to quick it up. It was ongoing conversations and communication. So it's having that continuous conversation with families, advocates, staff, senior management, most importantly the people that are receiving the care. Specifically, Trish mentioned that she's briefing a paper to the board of directors, so to touch on that, to keep the board involved in the change and what's happening. Continued conversation tables with staff, so that's what we've been doing at FaHCSIA.
Sorry, which question did you do?
Number 4. So just continuing the conversations, evaluating the processes, the policies, constantly reflecting and on the practices that we do.
Great, good. So lots of emphasis on conversations and reflection and chatting with boards. So thanks for that. Liz, your table.
Yep, we did question 4 as well, and Adele suggested each of us thinking about some baby steps that we could take over the next week or so before the next breakfast conversation.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And so Celeste said that she would focus on planning some small goals and finding gaps in some programs and filling those around client 1. So starting to have some conversations with clients about where are those gaps. Ben, Shirley and Amelia said what they can do is a mini evaluation of people's willingness to change and take risks. And before that would happen, Shirley said we need to talk to more people that they know, people with disabilities, about what are the risks and about individualised funding, so to kind of increase their knowledge about the issues. Adele said she's going to chat to her colleagues, her service managers, Glenn and Joe, about the planning meetings, and that's been on her to-do list a long time, and she's actually going to take responsibility for that actually to happen now, and to put that change in motion that she wants to drive. And I said for myself, I'm in a great role that I see a lot of different staff at the moment across the state, and I think I'm going to be influenced a bit by Pauline Stanley about perhaps being a bit more forthright and a bit more challenging and kind of just repeating some of this stuff so people realise it's not optional. You know, this is the reality, this is the new future.
Great. Yeah, Pauline sends her apologies, so I hope she's back next time. That's great. So your table's actually taking this on as a bit of an action plan. So it gives me an idea. Maybe that's where we should be heading, to all sort of leave here with something we're going to try out and then have a bit of a buzz about whether it worked or it didn't work when we come back next time. So that's it, Claire. So question 3, see what choice does. Question 3 is absolutely not a runner. And question 4 is.
I shouldn't have put up there.
No, it's great. Okay.
So how would you own your involvement? Well, firstly, that varies on the size and the structure of the organisation. But people talked about being the catalyst for conversations and being challengers, and that not only conversations but reflecting as well. Look at ways to involve the board. It's important to define what you do as an organisation, and you can identify natural opportunities for involvement within the organisation as well. And some steps were identified, planning small goals, identifying gaps, maybe doing a mini evaluation of the readiness to change within the organisation as well.
Oh, great. Good. Thanks, Claire. That looks great. The idea is that we're building these up around the wall, and so by the time we get to breakfast 6, we'll have the walls covered. So with that in mind, covering the wall with good ideas, I'm going to ask Darren to comment on the ideas that he's heard here today. So thanks, Darren.
Sure.
I don't know whether is it better down here from what to say? Thanks.
There's just listening to the stuff around the room. There's been some fantastic sort of conversations and discussions and dialogue that's happened, and not uncommon to the discussions and dialogue we have over in Perth as well. I mean, My place is fairly unique, where there's only about 2 of us that do this stuff absolutely true to form. Perth Home Care Services is the other. So all the other providers are probably similar to where you're at and are struggling about how they move to this spot. So some of the stuff that came out for me is the notion of co-create and how do you shift that mindset to get to where you give more control and authority to people with disabilities. I don't know your organisations, but how I would think a way of doing that would be to ask yourself these 2 questions. Ask yourself this question: are we doing this because we believe in it, or are we doing this because we have to do it? So in WA, they're talking about self-directed services from the government level down. So some organisations are doing it because the government's telling them to do it. So therefore it's not going to work. Your mindset is that I'm doing this because I'm going to respond to how I'm going to get funding. If you do it because you absolutely believe in it, that you want control and authority to be with people with disabilities, and you believe they can do it, then that's going to be a whole different mindset to, we've got to do it because the government tells us to do it. So that's the first thing I would sort of talk about. The other thing I would suggest is, in terms of doing that, always test your assumptions that you're making. That's one of the things that we do in my place quite a lot, is we test the assumptions we're making. So, for example, I heard when we're talking about risk, there were some concerns around the work health and safety issues for people and stuff like that. Our assumption there is that people's homes aren't safe. And I would go with the assumption that people do keep a safe home, so therefore why do we need to worry about that so much? We have to comply with legislation, but the people in shared management, their homes aren't unsafe, they're safe. They're providing, probably safer than some of the homes that we sort of, where we provide staff. So always test the assumptions that you're making, that there's, because we will overcomplicate legislation, because that's what we do as providers. We want to manage risk, to the point where we try to look at there being no risk. There's no such thing as no risk. There's always risk in everything we do. It's about how you mitigate those risks down to the level. So I would just caution people about testing your assumptions around some of that stuff. So I liked, I think it might have been David who talked about sense of purpose, and that comes into what is your sense of purpose? We're doing this because we believe in it, or we're doing it because we have to do it? And I think if you answer those questions, we're good. How do you get co-creation to occur, and that notion of choice, who makes it? Every couple of years I spend an hour or 2 with each of the coordinators and team leaders just for a coffee, and I ask them 3 questions. One is, what's the most challenging part about your job? What's the best part about your job? And what can we do to help support you to make life better? So what we as an organisation can we do? The thing that comes up about the most challenging part about their job is a family member wants this for their son or daughter, and their son or daughter wants that. Yeah. And the coordinator's stuck in the middle trying to balance all that stuff. So what we fundamentally have as a belief at my place is that families are critically important. As Patricia said, people will go home to their family. They typically won't go home to their service provider. So we will bring families along on that journey as much as we can. Because we're very clear that at the end of the day, if it all goes pear-shaped with my place, people will typically fall back to their family. And so families are critically important in terms of doing this. So Ben, if your mum rings me up and says you're coming to Perth, she's got to be involved, mate. So, in saying that, it's okay to have the difficult conversations with a person wanting this and a family member wanting that. I reflect on a guy we support, Nigel, Nigel has a mild intellectual disability. For various reasons, he had 24-hour, 7-day-a-week support, and I would almost call it surveillance on him. He couldn't really do anything without someone being around. And we felt that Nigel had become quite independent to the point that he didn't need overnight support. So you can imagine the conversation with the family where we said, we think Nigel could survive without having overnight support. So, you know, we were hit with a roadblock, and the family said, there's no way that's going to happen, and I will sue you if anything going to happen, and all that sort of stuff. So I like a challenge. So what we did is we just worked with the family about how we can put in some safeguards so we could meet Nigel's need, and we could also give the family some reassurance about how we did that. So what we did, Nigel lived in this small, his unit was in this small complex of 2 or 3 other units. So we said to Nigel, what about if we use some of your funding, Nigel, to rent a place, I don't know how far it was, but maybe 200 metres down the road, and we will get one of our staff to live in that place, so they're going to have free rent and that, and you can call on them if you need them. So Nigel overnight didn't have the staff member there. It's 200 metres down the road. If anything went pear-shaped, Nigel could ring and that staff member would respond. The family, I think because we had so many meetings, I think eventually caved in and said, okay, that's all right. But they could identify the safeguard that we had put in place. It wasn't just, well, we're not going to provide Nigel with overnight support. Just an extension to that, because Nigel didn't need overnight support, he didn't need all of his funding, so he saved his funding. So Nigel was also working in a business service. He was certainly a big fish in a small pond in those business services. He's a very talented guy. So what he wanted to do was set up his own business. So our government keeps telling us, well, we're going to move to outcomes as opposed to outputs. So we thought, well, let's challenge this. So we said, well, we've got a guy we're supporting. He's not using all of his funding. He wants to set up his own business. So therefore, we would like to use his surplus funding to buy him a ute so that he can set up his own lawn mowing business. Now that caused the government to go into all sorts of, tailspins and how can we do that and what's going to happen and blah, blah, blah. And this happened probably about 6 or 9 months ago, I think it was now. They're still sending stuff through to me about how My Place Foundation can get tax exempt when we purchase a vehicle. They can't get through to their head that I said, My Place isn't buying the vehicle. This vehicle was bought with Nigel's funding. It's in Nigel's name. Nigel is now responsible for the upkeep and maintenance and fuel and all that sort of stuff. What our role is to support him by driving it. Nigel doesn't have his driver's licence. We drive him to his jobs. He does the lawn mowing jobs, whatever it may be, and then he packs it up and stuff like that. So what our commission, I think, I'm not sure whether I think they've just probably said, oh look, just let them do it. I think they don't really know how to deal with some of the stuff we come up with. But what we wanted to do was test the government. If you're truly about outcomes, this is a self-employment opportunity for someone. So let's do that. Let's really talk about using funding in an innovative way. Nigel was saying, I don't want overnight support. What I do want is self-employment. So therefore we've moved Nigel to that point of view. So that's what I would just say in terms of managing that choice. It's a fine line we walk in terms of, but I would always encourage you've got to bring families along because the safety net for many people is family, so you've got to bring them along with that journey. So just in terms of risk, Ben, I liked your risk-reward paradigm. I think it's very true. The higher the risk, the higher the reward. And I would also caution people when you talk about risk that you're not talking about responsibility. There's a difference there. The organisation is responsible for managing the risk, but within that there's various responsibilities. So some of the stuff that I was hearing around risk is more about what are people's responsibilities. One of the biggest challenges I'm having with our state government at the moment is we're moving towards self-management, shared management, and then pushing all that stuff down. They know the way that My Place approaches this, where we talk about who is responsible for what. They know that we set up the consumer as the employer. They still send me a contract through to get the funding that we get, which says that I am responsible for ensuring that every person connected with My Place has a police clearance or a working with children's card. Now, my argument to the government is, if I'm not the employer of the people, how can I be held responsible for that? So therefore, give that responsibility to the consumer who is the employer. And they can't get their head around that because they want someone to be held responsible. And I'm saying they're accepting responsibility as the employer, so therefore it's their responsibility, it's not mine. And so it's truly saying who is responsible for this and where does the risk lie? And if you're clear about that, we're clear about it, our consumers are clear about it, they understand it, our state government is not, because they would rather hold My Place accountable than the consumer. I mean, that makes sense. But so that's a big argument we're having with our government at the moment, and saying the responsibility has to lie with the employer, and they are the employer. Same with the harmonised work health and safety laws. If we set the consumer up as the employer, they are responsible for work health and safety. That's one of your responsibilities as an employer. So therefore, My Place's role will be to give you resources and information that you need to be a responsible employer. So So just be careful with risk, that it's about responsibilities, not be clear about what the risk is and the responsibilities that go along with it. The other thing I would just look, I'm not sure what your roles are in your organisation, but I presume that you need to influence boards to do this. Don't forget about influencing government in all of this as well, because we're lucky in WA. Our state government is really pushing self-directed services, so there is some strong leadership coming from our government. There's strong leadership coming from our government department. Fortunately, Ron Chalmers, our Director General, used to be a local area coordinator, and so he's very much, in fact, our Executive Chairman, Greg Lewis, who set up local area coordination, he employed Ron, and Ron was my previous manager. So Ron absolutely supports this whole direction. So we've got some really strong leadership happening in WA, which is, helps our cause, I suppose. But you've got to influence your boards, but please don't forget that you've got to influence government as well. So, and what I would love is to come to these forums where there's government people sitting at the table as well, so they can hear some of this stuff as well. But unfortunately, they tend not to turn up because they don't want to hear what I'm going to say, probably. The other thing too is we can and we do overcomplicate some of this stuff. So really keep it simple. We have a thing at my place where we always try to say that any forms we have must be kept to one page. So we try not to have 2-page forms to fill out and stuff like that, because it just keeps it simple, and it keeps a discipline around keeping it simple. If we're getting consumers to do some of this stuff, we don't overcomplicate. What they want to do is live their life. They don't want to be filling out forms and bureaucracy and stuff like that. So we absolutely try and keep it simple. And the way you keep it simple, the richness in all of this is the dialogue you have with the people you support. So I still say, and I'll continue to say, my best teachers are the people that we support. So all of that stuff that we put up there is trial and error that we've learned, and it's what consumers have said, this is what I want. This is what I want as a service from you. Can you provide it? And so I think it was this table, Chris, I think you said, be really clear about what you do and what you don't do. And a lot of people are clear about what they do, and that stretches. Sometimes you'll be so some organisations in Perth, they are providers of support. They're now housing providers as well. They're now opening an open employment arrangement. They're now doing, other stuff as well. And so that's okay if that's what you want. If you want to be a service provider, multi-point service provider, that's fine. But if you do one thing, then just say, that's all I do. I don't do that. So if you're on employment, I don't do employment, but I'll refer you to this organisation who does do that. So be really clear about that. And the richness in the dialogue is providing those opportunities. So I've heard some people say that they're going to go and talk to some of their families and consumers. You have to have space to do that, and that's why the numbers that we give our coordinators, 1 to 11, is critical, because that dialogue and conversation, that can happen at that point. And so so we know what people want from their lives because the opportunity's there, the headspace is there, and I know we all want more time. So the doing part of it is in some respects is quite easy because you're doing it now. You're providing technical support to the people that you support, but it is also the important part in terms of keeping that simple as well. So the final thing I'd say is reasons to opt in to do this are really important, but try and limit your reasons to opt out of it as well, because I think that's equally as critically important. Because as a managing director, I've got to manage risk, and I will always look at why should we be doing this? I'll always look at the opt-out reasons so that I can keep myself safe and sleep at night and things like that. So try and limit the opt-out reasons for doing it, because your boards, when you start talking to your boards around this stuff, they've got to manage risk. That's what they're going to do, and they're going to be conservative in nature, they're going to be risk averse, and that's what you want a board to be. So try and limit those opt-out arrangements for them. So for example, I would love to hear an organisation, and this is not a criticism, to say in 10 years' time we will not have any group homes. We're going to move to totally individualised arrangements. That then limits the opt-outs. That's where you're moving to, that's what you're going to do. So that would limit those opt-out arrangements. So, but look, if I can just, again, like for Centre for Disabilities, I think this is great having these conversations. I hope you've got something out of it. from my place. I presented to you the best parts of my place. God knows we make mistakes every single day, and some big mistakes, some small mistakes, but that's all part of our learning, I suppose, is making those mistakes and how we do it. So I hope you've got something out of it, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions at this point, or to receive emails or phone calls from you in the future. But I think this is great the way this is being done. So.
Oh, thank you very much, Darren. And we won't. I won't thank you until the final round. But I just know that we've got so much out of you.
Absolutely.
It's been really fantastic. So thank you. But we'll all have a chance just to say how we're feeling and how the day has been for us, which would be a way of thanking Darren. But at this stage, I'd just like to call upon Shirley and Ben just to make a reflection on what we've heard today, how relevant is it to the lives of people. It is very deep.
Yeah.
So, who would?
Oh, Shell's instructed me to go first.
Oh,
well, firstly, I think it's just been awesome to hear about my place in Perth. I was fortunate enough to hear a presentation a few years ago. I think it was at the Odyssey conference about my place. So, but it was different to hear like a different side of how they actually set it up, and I found it really, really inspiring, and hope it actually happens in New South Wales one day. I guess for me, like, it's definitely helped me to reflect a lot, and I think I definitely reflect after today about what, like, not only personally about what I want for the future, but just in terms of like the guys in our group from Northcott. Like, I'm really, really keen to go back to the group and discuss with the guys, just even like what they know about risk and how much risk they'll be willing to take with, you know, achieving their life goal, whatever that may be, and just really trying to help them and, yeah, do the best for them and us.
Thank you very much.
Good.
Thank you for your comments. Shirley.
I think from this morning conversation it was great because I'm planning to move out, which is one of my path goals. Actually, it is one of my main goals before I did the path, but I didn't know how to tell my mum. Now she knows but worries, how will I get support when I don't have anyone? I would like my place to open in Sydney.
Oh, great. Thanks very much, Shirley. I think you not only bring the experience of being at Northcott, your life experience, but just hearing your personal viewpoints, I think touches our own sort of insights into how we can be better supporters. So thank you. I would like now just to finish, we've got 5 minutes, just how you're feeling and how's today been for you. And this is really a way of just reflecting and thanking Darren, really. So who would begin? Jackie, can you begin? How are you feeling and how's today been for you?
Oh, it's been fantastic. These meetings are, I'm really sorry I missed the last one because these meetings are just so challenging and so exciting, but or challenging, back to challenging. So how I'm feeling is incredibly challenged, but very excited. And thank you so much, Darren. It's one of the, I think we all came because we keep hearing that there's lots of change, but we don't know what it's going to look like. I think Michael said us right in the very first one by saying, yes, you do, look around you, we do know what it's going to look like, and we all went, oh God. But to see where it's been done and where it's been done well and how different that really is, because we all know we need to move, but it's really hard to see this traditional model becoming that, and to see that model actually sort of in the flesh and blood, so to speak, or at least hear about it, gives you a much different perspective about what we need to do and how we need to set up another company, really. But you know, that's one possibility. Thank you.
Look, very, very positive. I think it's been very inspirational to hear about my place and the work that's being done there, and thought-provoking in the best sense of the term. So I think I'm feeling quite challenged. but in a positive sense. I think mine's been stretched, and I think there's a lot of invitation to consider a lot of the concepts and the practices that you've shared with us. So thank you. Thanks, Darren.
Really challenged, but really enjoy the conversation around imagining better. Yeah, that's what I've taken away from it.
Thanks very much. Julie.
I was similar to everyone else really. I feel quite enthused actually. It's nice to have a practical example where I can begin to formulate thoughts around where we could start moving to and how that might look or might march forward. Yeah.
Thanks. Peter.
Yeah, Andrew Mitchell, my general manager, resigned about 3 days ago, and yeah, it was a huge thing really for that. And I think Paula and I had been, I don't know, we really kept him informed of everything that we were from here and just our vision around disabilities and all that sort of thing. And it came as a bit of a shock to me, even though I'm his chief assistant. But you know, it was just really encouraging for me, for David to be here, to hear such a practical demonstration of what it means to enjoy serving and working with people with disabilities. And yeah, so you know, it's just a little bit of a different world. They're going to have another restructure, but it's just been encouraging from that point of view, and it was great to have David here, and I appreciate you allowing him to come.
It's more than welcome any other time. Carly.
I think the word is challenged. It's actually asked of us some great questions which we need to go back to our organisations and challenge each other with. But in the reality of it, it's back to the person centred, it's back to the person with disability, and that's why we're all here. So to flesh out all of the rest of the stuff that's going on, if our focus is on that, then we're in the right direction.
Great. Thanks, Carly. Chris.
Yeah, like Darren just mentioned, it'd be good for members of our funding body to come along to these, and because I know that I've actually been in working parties where they've used the My Place as an example of what could happen in New South Wales, and I think it was good today to find out sort of like what are some of the characteristics that enabled My Place to first start up and then obviously progress. And one of those things is the flexibility around a common law contract, which I don't think has been investigated in New South Wales. So I think it's just always been assumed it's whatever the award says, and that obviously creates opportunities to then create the flexibility. But then you've also got sort of people further up in the departments that are actually have got a good sense of how it works on the ground. And I think that type of knowledge and wisdom and leadership, I'd like to sort of say does exist in New South Wales, but I don't think it does. So, but for me, it helped sort of clarify sort of what our next steps are within our organisation and where, you know, what we can implement sort of fairly, with a fair degree of success, with a few failures along the way. So that was really good for us.
Thanks, Chris. Just to say, we did invite her to come. We didn't spread the invitation more broadly. We just focused one person. But anyway, good to hear that you think they've heard about it before. Anyway, adapt.
Yeah, I think it's flowed on nicely. Thank you, Darren, from what Michael Kendrick was saying the other week around, you know, starting with one person at a time. I think today's sort of practical sharing of what it's really like to have an organisation that does deal with or work with individuals who really want to have that dynamic involvement in their own lives, and you know, talking about the challenges of family and stuff like that. But it's really made me think, well, hang on a sec, I can just start, you know, we can just start with one family or one person, and rather than, I'm currently working on our strategic plan, and I find all that stuff really, you know, and it's just not the way that my mind works. So I've found myself really daunted in the last sort of 3 months around that sort of stuff. So coming here and just hearing that back to grassroots, and I was saying to Michael, I'm a support worker. Really, I consider that's my trade. You know, I'm a support worker. I happen to do management stuff, but really, I still work with people 2 and 3 days a week. So just being reminded that we can put practical things in place, and it can start really, really small and it'll just spread from there. It doesn't have to be this whole, how are we going to change our organisation overnight? So thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Celeste.
I'm excited, sorry, but to see that a company or foundation has empowered people with disabilities to be business owners, to be employers, is sort of blowing me away, and it just means that what else can we do? What else? The opportunities should be endless. We shouldn't be saying, oh, we can't do this because of this. It's like, okay, we are going to do this, now how are we going to do it? And it was really good. No, I really got a lot out of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Celeste. Yeah, do you want to say anything else?
Just empowered as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, I think I was lucky enough to be here today. It was a positive experience for me. I learned so much, so yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Amelia. Sure.
Good. I enjoyed today.
Great. Thank you, Shirley. Please.
For me, listening to you, Darren, it has been a real catalyst for change. I feel like my thinking has shifted from listening to you, so thanks a lot.
Catherine.
Yes, it's been great, inspiring, and it sort of took me from one end of the spectrum and just blew it all out. So a whole lot to think about and reflect on, and I think it, our organisations currently, they need turning upside down. So yeah, got a lot to think about. Thank you.
I guess I'll touch on a bit of the change. I think naturally people are slightly resistant or fear change, but I find within these conversations that we embrace change and it's exciting, right? And hearing from what your organisation has done, it makes that fear and that resistance more of a positive thing, because that's what we could achieve. So I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Again, I feel quite challenged and confronted by a lot of what you're talking about, and that's a reality for me within my organisation, but also quite excited about the roadmap that you've developed and the vision that you've actually, proposed, which you're actually currently doing for a lot of your residents. So that sort of is the inspiring part for me. So there's a lot of thinking and ideas and taking things back to our organisation and staff and the board and advocates and guardians, and just getting everybody on board on the journey.
Trish.
Well, thank you, Darren. For me, I envy you because you've started from the other end of the spectrum, and I think it would be wonderful if we could just separate off and really develop a new initiative that will drive this, and maybe that is the answer for us all. But then that's how it will happen. And so thank you for sowing the seed of that. I mean, I was sitting here reflecting while I listened to other people around the room, and probably you get a different impression when you do that. And yes, I see it sort of an interesting and exciting concept. We should be looking at.
Thanks, Trish.
I think my brain's going through yet another revolution. I think I've got to stop coming to these conversations.
Spinning.
Look, part of me says that my experience of being in the disability sector has sort of demonstrates to me that as a human, part of our human nature is that we like things to be complicated. We tend to like to build our complexities. Adele refers to strategic planning, and we all get into that with gusto, and we all, as I said earlier, operating sort of trying to think what things are going to look like in 5 years' time and stuff. But the appeal of what you've done is it is a pretty simple model of actually people accessing what they need, and I guess to pare it all back as to what that purpose is, it is making things available to meet people's needs on their own terms. So I think there's a simplicity in there that we need to get back to. So thank you.
I think my place, I think Darren is quite courageous.
love what you've shared with us. You've given us a complete alternative, a way to do something different, and it shakes us to actually think what we can do ourselves. One of the resounding thing I've been thinking the whole time throughout the session is that, you know, we shouldn't confuse risk. I've been writing it down over everything. We shouldn't confuse risk with an action or a reason for not to do something behind it. So.
And I've really enjoyed today too. Every time you raised a new point or you went on to a slightly different topic all to do with my place, I could just have a sense of the consistency. And the organisation is obviously driven by a very strong purpose base. And when you live it out, that last example of the young man wanting to move out, the family being threatened, let's say, that you found a way through and it was consistent with your values and parents eventually agreed. Someone would live 200 metres on the road. So you're problem solvers as well. I think it's a great this. Thank you. Sam.
Thank you, Darren. I've been to presentations about My Place before, and My Place was in our last breakfast conversation series as well. I think just today, I think we got to learn a lot more of some of the important details that I didn't know about before. And I think following from Michael Kendrick's possibilities conversation, some of those things that people might think are impossible over in Australia, some of those things are happening already.
Great, thanks, Sam. Claire, how's it been for you?
Very interesting. Really enjoyed today. Thank you.
So will you all join with me and just thank you? Next time, Lorna Sullivan will be up from Canberra to talk to us about innovation. And she'll draw upon quite an extensive New Zealand experience. And I think one of her organisations she started there was called Imagine Being Better. So of course her philosophy is now with books as well. And so look forward to seeing you then.